You've been told to trust only what you can see, touch, and control. They said the universe is random, that life has no deeper meaning, that you have to fight, chase, and hold on tight or everything will fall apart. But if that were true, why does holding on so tight still leave you feeling lost? Why does trying to control everything only bring more anxiety, more fear, more doubt? Why do you still lie awake at night, wondering if everything is really going to be okay? The truth is, trust isn't blind, it's a deep knowing. A knowing that life has rhythm, that chaos has order, that the universe isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. And Buddhism holds the map, not to blind faith, but to unshakable inner peace. The kind of peace that stays with you even when nothing makes sense. The kind of trust that lets you finally let go without falling apart. Tonight, as you listen to these ancient lessons, something inside you will shift. The tightness in your chest will begin to soften. The noise in your mind will grow quiet. And in that silence, something deeper will awaken. A calm, a knowing, a trust not in the world as it appears but in the truth underneath it all. This isn't just another bedtime story. This is a journey back to the part of you that's always been safe, always been strong, always known the way. Are you ready to remember? Let's begin. You've felt it before, that heaviness in your chest when things don't go your way, that tight grip in your stomach when you try to control outcomes that refuse to obey. The world teaches us to fight, to push harder, to force results. But where has that gotten you? Tired, frustrated, worn down. There's a quiet part of you that knows there must be another way. This next part is not about giving up. It's not about becoming passive or helpless. It's about discovering a strength so deep, so grounded, it doesn't need to control anything to feel safe. That strength is surrender. And no, not the kind that feels like defeat. This is a different kind of surrender, the kind that Buddhism has whispered about for thousands of years. A surrender that sets you free, not makes you weak. Surrender, in Buddhism, is not the end of effort, it's the beginning of peace. It's choosing to loosen the grip on what you think should happen and returning to what is. Most people think surrender means you're letting life walk all over you. But that's not true surrender, that's resignation, and they are not the same. Resignation is when you stop trying because you believe nothing will ever change. It's heavy, it's hopeless. You shrink, you disconnect, you disappear into numbness. But surrender is light. It's alive. It's full of awareness. Surrender sees clearly, acknowledging the pain, the uncertainty, the fear, and still choosing to let go of control because it trusts in something deeper than the surface of events. At the heart of this path is mindfulness, being fully here, not just watching your thoughts, but learning to rest in them without being carried away by them. It's like sitting by a river and watching the current flow. You don't try to stop the water, you don't jump in and try to swim upstream. You stay grounded on the shore, present, aware, still. When you practice this kind of presence, you stop needing to bend life into your shape. You begin to feel a subtle shift, a sense that even when things are uncertain, you're not lost. Even when things are painful, you're not broken. This is what happens when you stop resisting and start witnessing. You become anchored in something unshakable. Now, this doesn't mean you don't act. Buddhism never teaches us to just sit and wait for miracles. It teaches us to act without clinging to outcomes. That's the subtle power, knowing that you can give your full heart to something and still let it go. You speak the truth without needing to be understood. You love deeply without needing it returned in a certain way. You work hard without being owned by the results. This is one of the hardest things for the modern mind to accept. We've been trained that control equals safety. But Buddhism gently exposes this illusion. Control is temporary. fragile. It cracks under pressure. True safety comes from accepting the impermanence of everything and choosing to meet it with calm awareness instead of resistance. The Buddha taught that craving is the root of suffering. Craving doesn't just mean wanting something. It's the mental tightness, the grasping, the "it must be this way or I'll fall apart." That's the craving that burns us out. Surrender, then, is the release of craving. Not the release of desire, but the release of desperate need for life to meet our expectations. You can still set goals. You can still have dreams. The difference is, you are no longer tying your peace to the outcome. You are not saying, "I'll be okay if this happens." You are saying, "I will stay present and grounded no matter what happens." That's inner power. That's the power no one can take from you. Sometimes surrender looks like stopping, like resting, like choosing not to chase what keeps wounding you. Other times, surrender is fierce. It's standing your ground without needing to win. It's walking away from something not because you've lost hope, but because your soul is no longer willing to bargain for peace. It is not the same as giving up. It's giving up the struggle while still walking your path. There is a story in the Zen tradition about a monk who was robbed. The thief took everything except the monk's clothes. As the thief was leaving, the monk stopped him and said, "Wait, you forgot the gift of the moonlight." The monk had surrendered all attachment to possessions, but not from weakness, from freedom. He had nothing to lose, and therefore nothing to fear. This doesn't mean you need to give away your things or stop caring about your life. It means you stop clinging so tightly. You stop measuring your worth by what you hold. You stop fearing change. You start trusting that even when life takes, it often gives in ways we don't yet understand. Trusting the universe is not naive. It's not pretending everything is perfect. It's seeing clearly that you are not separate from the unfolding of life. You are part of the great wave. You don't need to control it. You just need to learn how to ride it. You surrender to the moment, not because you've lost power, but because you have it. You surrender because you've seen that resistance only brings more pain. You've seen how trying to force people, situations, or timing only makes the journey heavier. You've seen that true control is learning to work with what's here, not fighting against it. This path is not easy. It requires trust. And trust isn't something you just switch on. It's built through practice, through falling, getting up, and falling again. Through letting go 100 times a day. Letting go of needing to be right. Letting go of how fast you think healing should happen. Letting go of the voice that says, "You're behind." Letting go of fixing people. Letting go of being understood perfectly. Letting go of always needing a plan. Each time you do, even in small ways, you make space. Space for grace, space for stillness, space for something wiser than your mind to guide you. This doesn't mean you won't feel pain. It means you won't be crushed by it. Because now, you don't fight it. You breathe through it. You make space for it. And in that space, the pain begins to soften. It begins to speak. It begins to heal. One of the reasons surrender is so transformative is because it brings you face to face with the part of you that always wants to escape discomfort. That part of you that says, "If I can just fix this, then I'll be okay." Buddhism doesn't try to take that voice away. It helps you hear it, understand it, and gently step back from it. You start seeing that you are not that voice. You are the awareness that hears it. From that space, you begin to feel something incredible. You begin to feel peace, no because the world changed, but because your relationship to the world changed. You're no longer at war with it. You're no longer at war with yourself. And this is where true strength comes from. Not from hardening, not from pretending you don't care, but from opening, from allowing, from walking with your fear instead of running from it. You might wonder, if I surrender, will I lose motivation? Will I stop achieving? The truth is, the opposite often happens. When you stop obsessing over outcomes, you actually free up the energy to do things with more clarity, more focus, more joy. You start to act from love instead of lack, from purpose instead of pressure. You show up more fully, not to prove yourself, but because showing up is a form of devotion. A devotion to the moment, a devotion to life, a devotion to your own growth. And even when things fall apart, even when doors close, you don't collapse. Because your peace was never built on the door staying open. It was built on knowing that when one path ends, another begins. You stop being afraid of change. You stop being afraid of uncertainty. You start to trust that even if you don't know what's next, something in you is already ready for it. This kind of surrender takes practice. It takes patience. It takes 1,000 small choices every day. Choosing to breathe instead of panic. Choosing to listen instead of argue. Choosing to rest instead of push. Choosing to trust instead of control. And little by little, these choices rewire your nervous system. They teach your body that it's safe to let go. They teach your heart that it's okay to not have all the answers. They teach your mind that it can stop fighting and start flowing. Eventually, surrender becomes second nature. Not because you don't care, but because you care differently. You care with open hands instead of clenched fists. You care with a steady heart instead of a scattered mind. You care without needing to grasp. And in that space, something beautiful happens. You begin to feel peace in the middle of the unknown. You begin to feel love even in the absence of approval. You begin to feel whole even when things are incomplete. This is the subtle art of surrender. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It doesn't chase. It simply lets go. And in letting go, it rises. Let that be your practice tonight. Not giving up, but letting go. Letting go of force, letting go of fear, letting go of the story that says you must have everything figured out. You don't. You just need to trust the step you're on and take it softly. Because when you surrender not from weakness, but from wisdom, everything begins to change. Not outside you, inside. And that changes everything. And as the grip of control loosens, as the breath deepens, as surrender roots itself into the soil of your awareness, something even more subtle begins to rise in ancient understanding that your presence in the world is not isolated, that your choices, your thoughts, your speech, your silence, they ripple outward, touching everything, not as punishment, not as reward, but as conversation, a dialogue, a living interaction with the very fabric of existence itself. This is karma, and everything you've been told about it may only scratch the surface. Most people hear the word karma and think of a cosmic scoreboard. Do good, get good. Do bad, suffer. But Buddhism speaks of karma in a much deeper, more nuanced way. It's not a tally. It's not divine revenge. It's not a fixed sentence written in the sky. Karma is movement. Karma is the echo of intention. It is the language through which your inner world speaks to the outer one, and the outer responds. Your every thought has a texture. Your every word has a frequency. Your every action leaves an imprint. These are not abstract metaphors. They are energetic realities. You're in conversation with life at every moment, whether you know it or not. And karma is that conversation's current. It starts in awareness, not in what you do, but in why you do it. The root, the seed beneath the surface. When Buddhism speaks of karma, it doesn't speak just of behavior. It speaks of volition, the mind that moves before the action is born. That quiet flicker of intention is where karma begins. Say you speak kindly to someone. On the surface, it may look like compassion, but if your motive was to be liked or avoid conflict, The karmic imprint is different. It isn't about performance. It's about truth. The universe is not responding to your mask. It's responding to your essence. Karma doesn't care what you pretend to be. It listens to the purity or distortion of your motive. That's why awareness is everything. You can't change karma by manipulating appearances. You change it by transforming the mind that acts. Karma is not a rigid punishment system, but a subtle teacher. It mirrors what you are, not what you claim to be. This can be confronting, but it's also liberating, because it means you're not trapped by your past. You're not doomed by one mistake. You can purify karma the moment you see clearly and shift the way you respond. That's where the dialogue begins. You make a choice rooted in fear. The universe offers you a lesson, not to hurt you, to reveal the fear so it can be released. You act from compassion. The universe reflects that peace back in ways you never expected. It's not a vending machine. It's not a system of linear transactions. It's more like a relationship, one that deepens with every conscious step you take. This is why karma is not fatalistic. You are not a prisoner of your past. You're a participant in a living process. Even if the conditions you're in today are the fruit of past seeds, the way you meet them now plants new seeds for tomorrow. And that, Buddhism teaches, is your real power. The key is to stop seeing karma as a scorekeeper and start seeing it as a compass. It doesn't exist to punish you, it exists to guide you, to reveal where you're aligned and where you're off course. The discomfort you feel after acting out of ego, that's karma speaking. The peace that arises after a selfless act, that's karma responding. And it's not always instant. Some karmic waves take time to return. Like seeds that bloom in the right season, some karmic results need time, space, and the right conditions. That's why patience is part of the path. That's why mindfulness is essential, because you can't always trace the line between cause and effect. But you can stay committed to planting seeds of clarity, compassion, and truth. This commitment turns your life into sacred communication. You stop reacting blindly, you start responding intentionally, your presence becomes cleaner, your choices become sharper. Even your mistakes become part of your awakening, because when they're seen without denial, they stop repeating themselves. That's one of the deepest lessons karma teaches. You are never being punished, you're being shown. Shown what still hurts, shown what still drives you unconsciously, shown where you still grasp, or avoid, or escape. Not so you can feel shame, but so you can feel freedom. Freedom doesn't come from avoiding karma, it comes from understanding it. Seeing how every painful loop is not a curse, but a reflection of something unresolved. When you meet it with courage, it softens. When you deny it, it hardens. Karma is not here to trap you, it's here to wake you up. And it responds with remarkable precision. Not always in the way the ego wants, but always in the way the soul needs. Sometimes the job you lose makes space for the calling you were ignoring. Sometimes the heartbreak that feels like the end is really the doorway to a more authentic love. Karma isn't punishing you, it's aligning you. Not to comfort, to truth. This alignment requires presence, because karma isn't just about big events, it's in the small habits, the tiny impulses you either follow or let go, the way you speak when no one is watching, the thoughts you feed, the energy you leave in the room after a conversation, the way you respond to silence, to conflict, to stillness. All of it shapes the texture of your path. When you begin to see karma in this light, you stop playing the victim. You stop waiting for luck to save you or fate to break you. You step into a different role, not the one who controls life, but the one who listens to it. And when you listen deeply enough, life starts to speak clearly. You begin to notice patterns. You begin to see how certain actions lead to tension, while others dissolve it. You become fluent in the language of karma. This fluency doesn't make you perfect, but it makes you awake. Awake to the impact of your energy, awake to the consequences of your choices, not out of fear, but out of care. Out of devotion to the kind of world you're helping to shape every time you act, speak, or think. Buddhism speaks of the 3 doors of karma: body, speech, and mind. Each of these is a channel through which you participate in this dialogue. You don't have to be a monk or scholar to use them well. You just have to pay attention. Is your speech creating peace or separation? Is your action coming from kindness or pressure? Is your mind rooted in truth or delusion? The more you ask these questions, the more clear the dialogue becomes. You stop stumbling in the dark. You start walking in rhythm with something larger than yourself. That rhythm is not always easy, but it is always honest. And it's in that honesty that real peace begins. There's a reason karma is so misunderstood. It challenges the ego. It removes the illusion that life is random, that we're powerless, that things just happen to us. But once you start to see clearly, it's impossible to unsee. You start to feel the feedback loop. You notice how certain thoughts drain your energy while others restore it. You witness how resentment poisons connection, how forgiveness releases the tightness you didn't even know you were carrying. These are karmic moments, and they are happening all the time. This is why practice matters, not for perfection, but for refinement. The more you practice presence, the more sensitive you become. You don't need to wait for karma to knock you down to listen. You start listening now, with care, with humility, with love. Because love is karma too. Real love, not attachment, not control, but the kind of love that gives freely, listens deeply, and holds space without expectation. When your actions begin to rise from that place, karma shifts. Your life softens. You start to meet people who reflect your own growth. You find yourself in spaces that nourish you. Not because you manipulated life, but because you stopped resisting its natural flow. There's no shortcut to this, no secret formula, just presence, just honesty, just the courage to look at your life not as a random collection of events, but as a mirror. Every experience, a message. Every relationship, a lesson. Every challenge, an invitation. Some people hear this and feel overwhelmed, as if karma means every little thing will come back to haunt them. But that's not how it works. Karma isn't trying to punish your ignorance, it's offering you chances to grow out of it. It's the engine of evolution. It gives you exactly what's needed, not to shame you, but to shape you. That's why kindness matters, integrity matters, stillness matters. Because what you put into the world doesn't disappear. It echoes, it returns. And not always in the way you expect, but always in the way you need. That's the hidden beauty of karma. It's intelligent, it's intimate, and it's always inviting you back to balance, back to presence, back to truth. And so the practice continues, not to escape karma, but to participate in it fully, to live in a way that leaves soft footprints, to speak in a way that clears the air, to think in a way that uplifts, even when no one is listening, because someone is always listening. The universe hears what's behind your words. It hears what you won't say out loud. It reads the space between your actions, and it responds not to punish you, but to remind you. Remind you of who you really are beneath the patterns, beneath the ego, beneath the fear. Karma is not about being perfect. It's about being real, being aware, being responsible, no in a heavy, moralistic way, but in a sacred, empowering one. You are not here to chase approval. You are not here to manipulate outcomes. You are here to walk with awareness, to speak with integrity, to act with compassion, to live as if the universe is not outside of you, but inside you, responding to every vibration you release, because it is. And once you know that, once you feel that, you can't live unconsciously anymore. You begin to choose with care. You begin to move with intention. You begin to trust that what you give, you live. This is karma. Not superstition, not fear, not punishment, but relationship, sacred, ongoing, alive. So the conversation never ends. Every thought you release, every action you take, every moment of clarity or confusion, it all echoes. You're always speaking to the universe, and it's always responding. But now another question begins to rise. If karma flows from intention and everything is in constant motion, what is it all built on? What lies beneath the shifting patterns, the changing forms, the stories and the roles? What remains when you peel back all identities, all attachments, all expectations? At the heart of Buddhist understanding is a truth so radical it undoes everything the mind holds onto. It doesn't give you something new to grasp. It invites you to see that nothing can be grasped at all. This is the teaching of shunyata, emptiness. Emptiness is not nothingness. It is not absence. It is not a void in the negative sense. It is spaciousness. It is openness. It is the lack of fixed, independent existence in all things. It is the realization that nothing exists in isolation. No self, no object, no event arises on its own. Everything arises in dependence on countless other causes and conditions. And this changes everything. Because when you truly see this, not just intellectually, but as a living truth, you stop clinging. You stop demanding permanence in a world that is built on change. You stop trying to build your sense of self on things that cannot hold the weight of identity. You loosen the grip on the idea of mine and me, and you begin to relax into something far more honest, flow. Understanding emptiness doesn't make you cold or detached. It makes you clear. Clear that your suffering comes not from impermanence, but from wanting things to be permanent, from treating the temporary as final, from grasping at shadows and wondering why your hands stay empty. But when you stop grasping, you begin to trust. Not because everything feels safe or predictable, but because you realize you were never in control to begin with. You realize that the unknown is not your enemy. The unknown is the nature of everything. And the more you resist it, the more it hurts. Emptiness reveals the space in which life unfolds. It's the silence between thoughts, the stillness behind movement, the open sky in which clouds appear and vanish. When you rest in this space, you stop fearing the next moment. You stop needing to hold on to the last one. You open. This openness is not passive. It's deeply alive. Emptiness allows full engagement with the present because you are no longer distorting it through attachment. You see clearly. You respond directly. You no longer need life to confirm your identity, so you are free to meet it as it is. And yet, the mind struggles with this. It wants something solid, something to hold. It wants a clear boundary between self and other, good and bad, success and failure. But shunyata reveals that these divisions are constructions useful sometimes, but ultimately empty of inherent meaning. Even your sense of I is a process, not a fixed point. What you call you is a flow of sensations, perceptions, thoughts, emotions, all interdependent, all conditioned. There's nothing in you that stands alone, untouched by the rest of the world. And that's not depressing, that's liberating, because it means you're not trapped. You're not frozen in some permanent identity. You can change, you can adapt, you can release the stories that no longer serve you. This is where cosmic trust begins to take root, not in certainty, but in spaciousness, in knowing that your value doesn't come from what you can hold on to, but from the awareness that holds everything. That awareness is not empty in a bleak sense. It is full of potential, full of wisdom, full of peace. When you let go of rigid definitions, you begin to see beyond appearances. You see how the person who hurt you was acting from their own conditioned patterns. You see how your own fear was never personal, it was a ripple in the sea of causes. This doesn't make you passive or naive, it makes you compassionate, because now you're not reacting to surface-level triggers. You're responding from a deeper understanding. And that response has clarity. It has balance. It no longer clings to outcome. It no longer spirals in fear. Because in the light of emptiness, even fear is seen for what it is: a thought, a wave, a passing condition. It arises, it fades. It's not the truth of who you are. So much of our pain comes from holding too tightly, holding on to roles, status, relationships, ideas. We attach meaning to things and then suffer when they shift. Emptiness invites you to hold everything more gently, to care deeply but without possession, to love fully but without needing to own. And when loss comes, as it always does, you grieve, but you don't collapse. You hurt, but you don't lose yourself, because you've stopped confusing impermanent things with your permanent nature. You've stopped asking the world to stay still so you can feel secure. That is the great shift, from building security on fixed things to building trust in the openness itself, from fearing the unknown to meeting it with calm curiosity, from seeking something solid to resting in the vastness of what is. This shift doesn't happen all at once, it unfolds in layers. At first, emptiness can feel strange, even scary. It's the undoing of everything the ego relies on. But with practice, you begin to feel its truth. You begin to relax into it. And what once felt like losing ground begins to feel like finding space. That space is sacred. It's what allows you to respond instead of react, to move without clinging, to change without fear. It's what allows creativity, flexibility, joy. It's what makes compassion possible. Because you're no longer locked in the prison of me versus you. You see the shared emptiness beneath all forms, and in that you find connection not through similarity, but through shared source. Even time softens in the light of shunyata. The past is no longer a trap. The future is no longer a threat. What matters is how you meet this moment, with this breath, in this awareness. And in this space, trust grows. Not trust in outcomes, but trust in presence, trust in the process, trust in life as it unfolds, even when you don't understand it. And this trust is not belief. It's not built on hope or expectation. It's built on direct seeing. You see that everything changes, that everything arises in dependence, that everything is empty of solidity and therefore open to transformation. This kind of vision doesn't make you detached from life. It connects you more deeply to it, because you're no longer trying to control the river. You're swimming in it. You're moving with the current instead of resisting it. You're learning to float in the unknown. In this way, emptiness isn't a lack. It's the ground of being, the space in which life happens. And when you trust that space, you stop needing to know everything. You stop fearing what's next. You trust not because you have a map, but because you know how to walk without one. This knowing is embodied. It shows up in how you speak, how you move, how you respond to the unexpected. You're less reactive, less tense, more present, more attuned. You no longer need to fill the silence. You no longer need to explain everything. You no longer feel the same panic when plans fall apart. You see clearly. Plans are empty. Control is empty. Identity is empty. Not in a nihilistic sense, but in a freeing one. Free to change. Free to let go. Free to respond with care rather than fear. Even purpose becomes clearer in emptiness. Not as a fixed goal, but as a living responsiveness. You don't need to define your life in rigid terms. You simply live with presence and care, knowing that the meaning is not in what you hold, but in how you hold it. And that's the final beauty of Shunyata. It teaches you how to live without armor, how to meet life as it is, without filters, without resistance, how to stay open even when things fall apart, how to love without attachment, how to act without ego, how to rest in the fullness of this empty, ever-changing moment. This is what freedom looks like. Not the absence of problems, but the absence of clinging. Not the promise of certainty, but the presence of trust. And in that trust, something profound unfolds. Not a belief, not a dogma, but a quiet, steady knowing that everything you need is already here in the space between thoughts, in the breath you're taking now, in the vast silence of your own awareness. That is Shunyata, and it is not far away. It is what's here when you stop reaching, when you stop naming, when you stop turning away from the truth that everything is empty, and in that emptiness free. So breathe. Let go again. Let go not to fall, but to rise. Because the universe doesn't need to be controlled. It needs to be trusted. And that trust begins in the space you're standing in right now. And once you've begun to trust the openness, the empty nature of all things, you start to sense a deeper rhythm behind it all. Not randomness, not chaos, but pattern, interdependence. A quiet order that doesn't always make sense to the thinking mind, but speaks clearly to the still one. You begin to realize that nothing arises alone. Nothing happens without a cause. And nothing, not even your own suffering, exists in isolation. This is the next unfolding. This is the truth of dependent origination. In Buddhism, this principle reveals that everything arises based on conditions. Not just the obvious ones, but layers upon layers of subtle influences that stretch far beyond what we can directly perceive. This isn't philosophy for philosophy's sake. It's a mirror showing you how your life, your reactions, your emotions, and your habits are not standalone events. They are linked, conditioned, connected. You weren't born into a vacuum. Your thoughts come from somewhere. Your habits were shaped. The fears you hold now didn't appear out of thin air. They were formed by past experiences, words spoken, environments lived in, patterns repeated until they felt like identity. But when you see that nothing exists independently, you begin to loosen the narrative that says, "This is just who I am." Because if everything depends on causes, then change is always possible. If your pain is conditioned, it can be unconditioned. If your anger has roots, those roots can be seen and released. This view gives you more than hope. It gives you a path. Dependent origination teaches that we are not isolated islands. We are strands in an infinite web, every thread affecting the others. Your mood affects your thoughts. Your diet affects your energy. Your breath affects your nervous system. Your presence affects the people around you. Nothing stands apart. And the more deeply you understand this, the more carefully, compassionately, and wisely you begin to live. When something goes wrong, the mind loves to search for one cause, one person to blame, one mistake to regret. But life doesn't work like that. There are no single-threaded problems. There are no standalone emotions. Every moment is a result of a constellation of influences, some seen, some not. When you accept this, you stop trying to control every detail. You stop obsessing over one failure or one decision. You begin to trust the complexity, the unfolding, the bigger picture. And that trust doesn't make you passive, it makes you more awake. You start to look deeper. If someone lashes out at you, you look beyond the surface. You see the layers, fear, conditioning, maybe even the pain they've inherited from others. You don't excuse harm, but you stop seeing it as personal. You stop reducing people to their worst moments. You remember that they too are shaped by causes, and that creates space for compassion. In your own life, this view changes everything. Let's say you're feeling anxious. Instead of labeling it a flaw, you trace its causes. Maybe it's connected to lack of rest, or too much caffeine, or unresolved grief, or a thought pattern from years ago. You gently untangle the web, not with judgment, but with curiosity. You stop treating your mind like a mystery or a threat. You begin to see it as a system, a beautiful, complex one that you can understand more fully over time. This understanding brings freedom, not because you can control every condition, but because you stop feeling powerless in front of them. You realize that small shifts matter, that planting one seed of mindfulness today affects how you respond tomorrow, that taking care of your body affects the clarity of your mind, that one compassionate choice ripples through your relationships in ways you may never fully see, but still shape everything. The law of dependent origination also opens your eyes to impermanence in a practical way. Because if things arise due to causes, and those causes change, then what has arisen will also pass. No feeling lasts forever. No state of mind is final. Everything flows, everything evolves. And if you trust this, you stop clinging so tightly. You hold pain with more spaciousness, because you know it's moving. You hold joy with gratitude, because you know it's part of a wave. This does not mean you become indifferent. You care more deeply, but your care becomes wiser. You start to focus on conditions, not just results. Instead of obsessing over whether you feel peaceful right now, you ask, what habits support peace? What thoughts disrupt it? What relationships nurture it? You begin to live more like a gardener tending to the soil, the water, the light not forcing the flower, but creating space for it to bloom. And you begin to see others differently. You understand that their behavior too is conditioned, that their struggles come from somewhere, that judgment is rarely helpful, and curiosity often is. This softens your reactions. It expands your patience. It doesn't make you naive, it makes you grounded in wisdom. Because dependent origination doesn't just explain suffering, it also explains healing. It tells you that no transformation happens in a vacuum. Healing happens in relationships, in safe environments, in new patterns built slowly over time. This is why community matters. This is why your surroundings matter. You start to choose more carefully, not out of fear, but because you know you're always being shaped. The concept also dismantles the illusion of control in a powerful way. Not to leave you helpless, but to set you free from the obsession with controlling what is beyond your reach. You begin to focus on what is within your reach, your actions, your attention, your speech, your inner response. You let go of needing to predict every outcome. You shift your energy to showing up well in this moment, knowing that this moment contributes to what comes next. And that brings peace, because the anxiety of trying to manage the future begins to ease. You begin to understand that the future is not a blank canvas you can control. It's a living field shaped by what you water today. So you water it wisely. You bring presence into your choices. You align your energy with the values that matter. Not perfectly, but steadily. The more deeply you live this, the more reverence you feel for the unseen, for the slow, for the complexity behind every moment. You begin to trust the process, even when you can't see all the threads. You begin to trust that your efforts, though small, are never wasted, because even the smallest cause contributes to change. This shift also helps you release guilt, because you stop believing you were supposed to know everything. You stop beating yourself up for what you didn't understand at the time. You see clearly, you were shaped too, and now that you know more, you do better. That's enough. That's the path, and it's unfolding one condition at a time. This teaching invites humility too, because no one stands alone. No success is isolated, no failure is total. You begin to see how everything good in your life has been supported by teachers, by kindness, by sacrifices you may never know. And this makes you grateful. It makes you want to give back, to become a positive condition in someone else's life. That's the power of dependent origination. It builds a sense of responsibility, but not one rooted in fear, one rooted in care, in presence, in the understanding that what you do matters, even if the results take time, even if you never see them fully bloom. It's a call to live intentionally, to stop asking, "Will this fix everything?" and start asking, "Is this one step in the direction of truth, compassion, or wisdom?" You no longer demand immediate results. You trust the process. You become more patient with yourself and others. This understanding also helps dissolve resentment, because you see how people are caught in their own conditioned loops. It doesn't excuse harm, but it helps you understand why people repeat pain. And in that understanding, forgiveness becomes more possible. Not forgetting, but letting go of the illusion that it was ever personal. You also start to see your own conditioning more clearly. The stories you inherited, the assumptions you've never questioned. And instead of feeling shame, you feel empowered because now you can shift them. Not overnight, but slowly. Through new choices, through deeper awareness, through better questions. Even meditation becomes clearer in this light. You stop trying to force silence. You see that calm arises from certain conditions: slower breath, relaxed body, focused attention. You stop fighting the noise and start tending to the ground. And over time, stillness arises not as a reward, but as a natural response to the space you've made. You learn to trust cause and effect not as a dogma, but as a deep rhythm of life. And this trust changes your relationship to uncertainty. You stop needing to control outcomes. You begin to focus on your side of the web. You take care of your thread, and you trust that doing so supports the whole. There's beauty in this. There's peace. Because even when life feels chaotic, you begin to sense the deeper weave. The invisible threads connecting your pain to your healing, your confusion to your growth, your isolation to your eventual connection. You stop seeing your life as a collection of broken pieces. You start seeing it as a tapestry still being woven. Every choice matters. Every small shift in thought, every breath taken with awareness, every kind word, it all ripples. So when life feels overwhelming, you don't freeze. You return to the basics. You ask, what is one condition I can change right now? Can I soften my breath? Can I speak more gently? Can I choose a thought that aligns with care? These aren't small things. They are the path itself. Because in a world built on interdependence, there are no neutral moments. Everything you do is part of something larger. And when you remember this, not just as theory, but as lived experience, you walk differently, you speak more mindfully, you live more fully. Not out of pressure, out of reverence, out of trust in the web, the one you're already part of, the one that's holding you, even now. And the more you sense the web, that endless flow of causes, conditions, choices, and consequences, the more one question begins to echo beneath it all. Who is the one experiencing this? The thoughts, the reactions, the roles, the feelings, they come and go, shift and change, rise and fade. But if everything is interdependent, constantly shaped by what surrounds it, then what is this thing we call me? This is where the teaching goes deeper, into the heart of self, into the illusion that something fixed, permanent and separate sits at the center of your experience, into the Buddhist insight that there is no self, and that understanding this is not a loss but a profound freedom, one that builds a kind of faith that no outer certainty can ever give. To hear that there is no self can be unsettling at first. The ego, so used to building and defending identity, tightens in confusion. But Buddhism does not teach that you don't exist. It teaches that the self you take to be solid is, in fact, a construction assembled over time through memory, habit, desire, fear, and belief. It feels real. It feels central. But when examined closely, it begins to fall apart. Thought arises, then it passes. A mood appears, then shifts. The body changes year by year. What you believe at 20 may not hold at 40. What you cling to today may dissolve tomorrow. So who are you beneath all that movement? What remains when the labels drop away? The answer, in Buddhist thought, is not a hidden core or secret soul. It is awareness itself, clear, boundless, open, and unowned. Not a self behind experience, but a field through which experience flows. The moment you stop clinging to a fixed identity, something expansive reveals itself. And it isn't a void of meaning. It's a release of confusion. You begin to see that the self you defend, your reputation, your opinions, your story, is not the stable foundation you thought it was. It's a pattern, a reflex, a response to conditions. And while it's functional, it's not ultimate. Recognizing this doesn't erase your personality, it removes the illusion that your personality defines you. And this is where unshakable faith begins to emerge. Not the faith of blind belief, but the faith that comes when you stop placing your security in something that always changes. As long as you tie your worth to your image, you will suffer. As long as you chase meaning through roles and titles, you will remain anxious. As long as you believe you are the thinker of every thought, the controller of every feeling, the doer of every action, you will live in fear of falling short. But when you see clearly that there is no solid self to protect, you soften, you relax. The need to win, to prove, to justify begins to dissolve. You don't become passive, you become free. You begin to act, speak, and move not from a place of identity maintenance, but from a place of deep responsiveness. In that space, life flows more naturally. You no longer feel responsible for keeping an idea of yourself alive. Instead, you begin to trust the intelligence that moves through you when the ego steps aside. This is not about disappearing, it's about opening to something far more spacious than the story of me. The no-self teaching invites you to see through the illusion of control. You don't choose your thoughts before they appear. You don't pick your emotions like groceries off a shelf. They rise, they pass, they move in response to countless hidden causes. And yet, we suffer when we identify with them as if every flicker of mind defines who we are. But it doesn't. When a wave crashes on the ocean surface, the ocean doesn't become the wave. It holds it, lets it rise, lets it fall. In the same way, awareness holds thought, feeling, sensation, but is not defined by any of them. You are not the wave. You are what holds the waves without clinging. This recognition builds a deep inner trust. Not because you have answers, but because you stop asking the wrong questions. You stop asking, "Who am I supposed to be?" and begin to rest in what is arising now. You stop trying to fix your identity and start paying attention to your experience. In that attention, the ego softens and the present moment sharpens. And in that sharpness, clarity grows. You begin to trust not in the self, but in the process. Not in a fixed identity, but in the unfolding. Not in rigid belief, but in direct awareness. And that trust becomes unshakable, because it's never tested, but because it's not built on anything that can be broken. This shift changes how you suffer. Before, pain felt personal. Now, it's just part of the flow. Before, fear meant failure. Now, it's just energy moving. Before, doubt meant you were wrong. Now, it's a doorway to deeper inquiry. You don't reject anything. You don't cling to anything. You let it come. You let it go. And in letting go, you find peace. This does not mean you stop functioning in the world. The relative self remains. You still use your name. You still pay bills. You still have conversations. But inside, something shifts. You're no longer confused about where your freedom lies. You stop looking for security and status. You stop tying happiness to approval. You begin to trust the silence more than the story. And this trust creates stability, not the brittle kind that snaps under pressure, but the flexible kind that bends and holds. When someone disagrees with you, you don't panic. You don't need to defend an identity. When plans change, you adjust. When praise comes, you don't inflate. When criticism hits, you don't collapse, because you are no longer the identity reacting. You are the awareness responding. This is the heart of Buddhist practice, not to build a better self, but to see through the illusion of a fixed one. And in that seeing, to rest more fully in reality, you stop seeking constant validation. You stop fearing imperfection. You start living in tune with what's real, not what the ego wants to believe. And what's real is always changing, always moving, always more than what one's self-concept can contain. So you let go, you trust, you surrender not to passivity, but to presence. You show up for your life without needing to be anyone special. And that is where true power begins. Because in truth, the ego is exhausted. It's been trying to hold everything together, your story, your value, your image. But when you see that it doesn't need to, that there's no fixed self to protect, everything gets lighter, even grief, even anger, even failure. You meet it all with curiosity instead of fear. This also changes how you connect with others. Without a rigid self to defend, you're less reactive. You listen more, you judge less. You stop projecting your unmet needs onto others. You start meeting people where they are, not where your ego needs them to be. This makes love more honest, more unconditional. You become less attached to roles. Whether someone sees you as strong or weak, right or wrong, doesn't shake your ground, because your ground is not made of image anymore. It's made of presence. And presence is not dependent on perception. That's why this teaching builds faith, because it brings you closer to truth. And truth, even when it's uncomfortable, is stable. The closer you are to it, the less you fear life, the less you fear death, because both are part of a process, not interruptions to a self. When there is no fixed self to preserve, there is no fear of losing it. And that's the root of deep spiritual confidence, not egoic pride, but quiet strength. You no longer need to feel important, you just need to be clear. You no longer need to feel certain. You just need to be present. You no longer chase meaning in the future. You live it now by being fully here. There's beauty in this, because once you release the pressure to be someone, you are free to truly see. To notice the breeze, the breath, the light, the subtle unfolding of life, as it is not as you want it to be. You stop editing the moment, you start participating in it. And even when old habits return, as they will, you don't panic, you don't fall back into shame. You see them, you greet them, you work with them, without judgment, without identification. You treat even your egoic patterns as passing clouds, not as failures, but as conditions to be understood. This is what it means to walk the middle path, not clinging to the self, not denying experience, but resting in the awareness that holds both. That awareness doesn't belong to you. It is what you are when the mind is quiet, when the story softens, when the labels drop. It's peaceful there, not because life stops hurting, but because your relationship to pain has changed. You stop needing to escape it. You stop turning it into identity. You meet it, you hold it, And then, when it's ready, you let it go. And even if it stays, you stay with it not as the one who suffers, but as the one who sees. In the end, the no self-teaching isn't about losing yourself. It's about seeing through the layers that were never you to begin with, and in that seeing, a quiet trust begins to grow. A trust that doesn't waver when plans fall apart. A trust that doesn't need applause. A trust that doesn't collapse under change. Because now you know, you were never the wave, you were always the ocean. Still, vast, free. And as the grip of ego fades, as the story of me dissolves into the stillness of awareness, something begins to surface, something deeper than thought, quieter than emotion, clearer than analysis. A presence that doesn't argue, a knowing that doesn't need proof. Once the mind stops shouting and the identity stops reaching, a space opens. And in that space, something profound happens, not with noise, but with silence. This is the quiet invitation of noble silence keynote, the absence of sound, but the fullness of stillness. A silence that does not disconnect you from the world, but connects you to it in a more honest way. One that doesn't suppress expression, but reveals what is true beneath the layers of noise. This kind of silence isn't empty, it's full of clarity, depth, and listening. In Buddhist tradition, noble silence isn't about muting the voice, it's about quieting the noise that clouds inner perception. The teachings describe it not just as a lack of talking, but as a presence so complete it doesn't need to speak. It is the silence that comes not from force, but from understanding. A silence chosen, not imposed. This silence has a purpose. It is not a retreat from life, but a deeper entry into it. By stepping back from habitual talking, explaining, defending, and interpreting, you make room to hear what usually gets buried. The body speaks, the emotions surface. The deeper knowing that words cannot carry begins to rise. You begin to hear your life in a new way, not as a story being told, but as a living field of experience unfolding. Noble silence creates the conditions for this kind of hearing. In ordinary life, most of what we say is reactive. We fill space out of habit, anxiety, or discomfort. We speak to be seen, to be right, to be safe. But silence slows that down. It pauses the performance. It allows you to observe what is driving your need to speak. You begin to see which words come from clarity and which come from fear. In the absence of noise, thoughts don't disappear, but your relationship to them changes. You begin to notice their patterns. You notice how quickly the mind jumps to self-reference, how often it replays the past, how much it needs to interpret, justify, plan, or narrate. Silence brings these tendencies to light, not to shame them, but to see them for what they are: habits, not truths. This awareness brings space. Space to choose, space to listen, and not just to others, but to yourself. In silence, intuitive knowing becomes more accessible, no because it wasn't there before, but because now there's less interference. You begin to distinguish the voice of habit from the voice of insight. One is loud, urgent, restless. The other is quiet, stable, steady. And the more you listen, the more clearly you hear. The silence also brings you closer to the present. Without the distraction of speech, you start to experience life directly. You feel the breath more fully. You notice the tension in your body. You see the details of your surroundings with sharper attention. Presence is no longer a concept, it becomes your natural state when the noise fades. Trust begins to deepen here, not because you've figured things out, but because you've learned to be with what is. Silence is the doorway to that kind of trust, the kind that doesn't demand answers, but allows space for answers to arise on their own. You stop forcing clarity. You allow it. And when it comes, it's more stable because it's rooted in direct perception, not in mental noise. Noble silence is also a powerful teacher in relationships. It reveals how much of our connection is built on assumptions, projections, and the need to fill space. When you are silent with someone, not in avoidance, but in presence, something shifts. A deeper layer of connection opens. You begin to listen, not to respond, but to understand. You stop rehearsing what to say next. You start receiving what is actually being said. This changes the quality of your presence. You become more grounded. People feel safer around you, not because you have the right words, but because your silence is not empty. It is awake. It is kind. It makes space for others to show up without needing to perform. Silence also strengthens discernment. You begin to sense which words need to be spoken and which do not. You stop wasting energy on explaining what doesn't need defending. You stop speaking to avoid discomfort. You start to value truth over approval. And when you do speak, your words carry weight not because they are loud, but because they are chosen. In noble silence, you learn the art of restraint not as suppression, but as power. You see that not every emotion needs to be voiced to be valid, that not every insight needs to be shared to be real, that not every opinion needs to be heard to matter. Silence teaches humility. It teaches timing. It teaches you to value presence over performance. In moments of deep silence, something else becomes clear. Your connection to the universe doesn't require constant thinking. It doesn't require explanation. It doesn't need words to be real. It is felt, known, trusted. This is where inner guidance speaks not through noise, but through clarity, not in the voice of the mind, but in the stillness behind it. This kind of trust cannot be taught through argument or logic. It grows through presence, through being with silence long enough to recognize it as a teacher, not a threat. Through choosing stillness over distraction, even when it's uncomfortable, because that discomfort is the edge of transformation. It's where the surface noise breaks and something deeper can rise. And what rises is often not what you expected. It might be old emotion, unprocessed grief, fear that had been hiding under the busy surface. Silence doesn't suppress these things, it invites them up. And when met with care, they begin to release, not through solving, but through seeing. This is why silence is not escape, it's confrontation, the gentle kind, the honest kind, the kind that heals by revealing what has been ignored, the kind that builds trust not by providing answers, but by removing the noise that keeps you from hearing them. Silence is also the space where you learn to witness thought without becoming it. Without speech to reinforce identity, the ego has less to stand on. Its opinions have nowhere to land. Its stories have no audience. You begin to see that much of what you think you need to say was only ever meant to protect a version of yourself that never really existed. In that seeing, the ego loosens. And what takes its place is not a blank void but presence, awareness, the kind that doesn't need to narrate life to feel alive, the kind that knows truth without needing to explain it. This practice doesn't need to be extreme. You don't have to disappear into the mountains or renounce all speech. You can begin right where you are, a few minutes a day, a morning without talking, a walk in silence, a meal without distraction. These moments matter. They change how you relate to yourself and to the world. Over time, silence stops being awkward. It becomes a friend, a refuge, a reminder. When things feel chaotic, silence brings you home. When the mind races, silence slows the spin. When life feels loud, silence helps you hear again not just your own needs, but the pulse of something greater moving through everything. This is how you begin to hear the universe, not through signs in the sky or answers written in stone, but through subtle knowing that arises when you're quiet enough to receive it. When you stop filling the space, you discover that the space is not empty. It is full of guidance, of clarity, of wisdom. You begin to trust this. You begin to live by it. You make decisions not from panic, but from inner alignment. You say yes not out of obligation, but from inner clarity. You say no without guilt. You stop needing to explain your truth because you are no longer disconnected from it. And when you do speak, your words carry that silence with them. They are fewer, more precise, more honest, less reactive, more kind, because they are not trying to cover silence, but to express what it revealed. The more you practice noble silence, the more natural it becomes. You begin to crave it, not as escape, but as alignment. You stop needing to run from your inner world. You start resting in it. And from that rest, a new kind of movement arises, not driven by restlessness, but guided by stillness. You discover that silence is not the opposite of action, it is the source of wise action. It is where true response is born, where clarity replaces confusion, where knowing replaces doubt, where connection replaces performance. This is the quiet power of noble silence. It does not demand attention, it does not shout, it does not seek credit, but it changes everything. Not by doing more, but by allowing more. Not by controlling the moment, but by entering it fully. And in that fullness, you begin to hear not just your own thoughts, but the quiet rhythm of something far beyond you, a presence that has always been there, waiting to be heard. In silence, you remember. And in remembering, you trust. The deeper you go into silence, the more clearly you begin to feel what words often fail to express. Underneath all the noise, beneath every question, past every layer of confusion, what remains is tenderness. Not weakness, but a raw, open presence that notices suffering and does not turn away. Silence doesn't just connect you to your own truth. It softens the boundary between yourself and the rest of the world. You start to sense that your pain is not separate from anyone else's, that your healing is tied to theirs. And from this recognition, something powerful begins to take shape, the will to serve, to awaken not only for yourself, but for all beings. This is the heart of the Bodhisattva path. In Mahayana Buddhism, the Bodhisattva is not a perfect person or a distant ideal. It is a commitment, a direction, a vow made again and again, not out of obligation, but out of deep compassion. The vow says, I will not abandon the world. I will awaken fully, and I will keep returning for others, even if it takes lifetimes. These are not just poetic words. They are a radical act of trust. When you take these vows, even silently within your own heart, you are declaring something profound, that liberation is not an individual escape, but a shared journey. That freedom is not real unless it includes everyone. That the deepest purpose is not self-improvement, but boundless care. This vow shifts everything. It anchors your path in something bigger than your own comfort. It gives meaning to difficulty. It reframes struggle. When pain arises, you no longer ask only how to escape it. You ask how to use it, how to understand it, how to transform it, and how to help others through it. Your suffering stops being personal. It becomes part of your training, part of your capacity to understand the pain of others without turning away. The Bodhisattva doesn't wait to be perfect. That's not the point. The vow is made in the middle of the mess, in the face of doubt, in the presence of fear. The vow is what carries you through those states. It holds you when your own motivation falters. It reminds you that the path is not about feeling good all the time. It's about staying present, open, and committed, even when it's hard. Taking this vow means you start to live from a different center. Instead of constantly asking, "What do I need?" you begin to ask, "What is needed?" You start listening more deeply not only to your own heart, but to the suffering around you. And that listening becomes action. It becomes presence. It becomes a willingness to keep going even when it's uncomfortable, because something in you has seen that compassion is more powerful than fear. And here's the most beautiful part. The more you give yourself to this vow, the more supported you feel. Not by certainty or control, but by a deeper current. A sense that you are not alone, that the universe itself is rooted in compassion, not as sentiment, but as truth. You begin to trust this not as belief, but as something you feel in your bones. A knowing that grows as you live the vow, not just think about it. This trust becomes your strength. When the path feels unclear, when setbacks come, when emotions feel overwhelming, you return to the vow. You don't need a map. You have direction. You have intention. You have a reason to take the next step. And that next step is always here, always possible, always sacred. The Bodhisattva vow is also practical. It teaches you how to move through a world that is full of suffering without becoming hardened or hopeless. It doesn't ask you to fix everything. It asks you to respond, to keep your heart open even when it would be easier to shut down, to keep showing up, not because you're winning, but because others are hurting. That kind of commitment grows trust not only in your own strength, but in the goodness of the path itself, in the possibility of transformation, in the truth that compassion is not weakness, but wisdom in motion. When you act from compassion, you don't just reduce suffering, you become less entangled in your own. You become lighter, freer, more aligned with something larger than yourself. This is not about self-sacrifice. It's about self-expansion. When you hold the vow, you don't disappear. You become more real. You begin to see yourself as part of the whole. And in that, a deep sense of purpose arises. Not the kind that depends on praise or results, but the kind that holds steady in all conditions. You also begin to see that compassion is not always soft. Sometimes it's fierce. Sometimes it's boundary setting. Sometimes it's speaking hard truths. But when it's rooted in the vow, it's always free of self-centeredness. You're not acting to be right or to be seen. You're acting because the vow asks, how can I reduce harm? How can I serve awakening? This mindset shapes everything. It shapes how you speak, how you listen, how you spend your time. You start to let go of what doesn't serve that deeper intention. You no longer need everything to be perfect before you help others. You no longer wait until you're fully healed to show up. You start from where you are, with what you have, again and again. And each time you return to the vow, something inside stabilizes. The fluctuations of the ego lose their grip. You trust the vow more than you trust your moods. You trust compassion more than you trust your fears. This is not about suppressing your needs. It's about recognizing that your deepest need is to live in alignment with your heart, and that alignment includes the whole world. The Bodhisattva path also expands your view of time. You stop needing immediate results. You stop needing people to change on your timeline. You stop demanding that your impact be visible. You trust that seeds are being planted. You trust that presence matters, even when it doesn't feel productive. You begin to embody patience not as waiting, but as staying true. This kind of trust is unshakable because it's not based on outcomes, it's based on intention. You know that you're moving in the direction of truth, and that's enough. You don't control the results. You don't need to. You've handed yourself over to something more enduring than short-term reward. And this changes your relationship to fear. You may still feel it, but it doesn't define you. It becomes something you carry, not something that stops you, because the vow is stronger than fear. The vow gives your courage a reason. It reminds you that the point is not to avoid difficulty. The point is to meet difficulty with wisdom and love. You begin to see that the path is not about overcoming others or even yourself. It's about remembering who you really are beneath the defenses, beneath the patterns, beneath the doubt. You are not just a person trying to get by. You are a being committed to awakening for everyone. And that commitment does not go unnoticed. The universe begins to reflect it back, not always in obvious ways, but in subtle support, a sense of being carried, a clarity that wasn't there before, a strength that rises when you thought you had none left. These are the signs that the vow is alive, that you're not walking alone. The path of the Bodhisattva is vast. There is no end to compassion, no finish line, no checklist. But that's what makes it so powerful. It asks for your whole life not as perfection, but as offering. Not as performance, but as presence. You don't need to be anyone special. You just need to care deeply and act accordingly. Over time, the vow becomes less about words and more about being. You no longer have to remind yourself what matters. You embody it. And that embodiment becomes a light for others, not because you're trying to lead, but because people feel something steady in you, something trustworthy, something real. This is how the vow anchors your trust, not in certainty, but in connection, not in control, but in compassion. You begin to see the whole world as part of your path. Every being, every moment, every breath becomes an opportunity to wake up and to help others wake up too. And this brings joy, not the fleeting kind, but the deep joy of living in alignment, of knowing that your life is not separate from the whole, that your healing supports the healing of others, that your presence matters even when no one sees it, that your vow lives in everything you do. This is not a burden, it is a blessing, a reminder that you are not here only for yourself. You are here as part of something larger, and that something is woven through with compassion. You can feel it when you pause, when you breathe, when you remember. And when you do, you return to the vow again, quietly, fully, willingly, and that is enough. And when you make the vow to walk the path not just for yourself, but for all beings, something fundamental shifts inside. You begin to feel it not as an idea, but as truth. You are not separate. Your suffering is not just yours. Your healing reaches beyond your skin. Every act of care, every moment of mindfulness touches a thread in a much larger fabric. You are already connected. And this connection is not poetic. It is reality. One that Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh called into being. This word, gently offered and endlessly deep, carries a simple but life-altering truth. Nothing exists by itself. Everything depends on everything else. A flower cannot grow without the rain, the soil, the sun, the gardener, and the centuries of life that made those elements possible. A person cannot breathe without trees, cannot speak without language, cannot live without others who walk beside them, near or far. To be is to interbe. Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings on interbeing are not abstract. They are deeply practical and immediately personal. They offer a way to experience life, not through the illusion of isolation, but through the lens of belonging. Not the kind of belonging that requires approval or fitting in, but the kind that simply is. You belong because you exist, and you exist through others. When you see this clearly, fear begins to soften. Much of the fear that lives in the human heart comes from the belief that we are alone, that our pain is ours alone to carry, that our joy is fleeting because it ends with us, that our mistakes cut us off from love. Interbeing dissolves this illusion. It shows that your joy is part of a shared field, that your pain echoes through generations, not to burden you, but to be seen, felt, and transformed. That your existence is never separate, even when you feel lonely. This does not mean we lose ourselves in others. It means we see ourselves more clearly because of others. Thich Nhat Hanh often spoke about how we cannot remove a sheet of paper from the tree, the sun, the logger, or even the clouds. The paper holds all of them. In the same way, you hold your parents, your teachers, your friends, your ancestors, and even the strangers who have touched your life unknowingly. When you begin to see through this lens, your sense of identity becomes less rigid. You stop needing to define yourself so sharply. You stop clinging to separation as protection. Instead, you soften into connection, not in theory, but in the way you breathe, the way you speak, the way you listen. You begin to understand that your words affect not only the person you speak to, but the entire atmosphere of your world. Thich Nhat Hanh invited people to experience this by slowing down, by walking gently, by eating with awareness, by speaking with intention. These practices are not rituals for their own sake. They are doorways. When you eat a piece of fruit with full attention, you taste not just the sweetness, but the earth, the rain, the sun, the hands that picked it. You taste the world in a single bite. And in that awareness, gratitude arises not forced, but natural. This awareness of interbeing also deepens responsibility, not out of guilt, but out of love. When you realize that your well-being depends on the well-being of others, you care differently. You don't act only for yourself. You begin to see that healing your own heart helps soften the hearts of others, that being patient with yourself allows you to be more patient with the world, that when you speak with kindness, you shift the air others breathe. Interbeing teaches that transformation is not linear or limited to one person at a time. It ripples. Every moment of presence, every act of compassion is part of a larger movement. This gives meaning to even the smallest action: a smile, a pause, a breath taken instead of a reaction. These things are not small. They are threads in the tapestry of life. They matter more than we know. The beauty of this view is that it makes space for everything. You don't have to deny your suffering to be part of the whole. You don't have to hide your imperfections. Interbeing includes the broken pieces. It includes the shadow. It includes the parts of you that still feel cut off, because those parts too are shaped by relationships, by past pain, by unmet needs, by forgotten kindnesses. Nothing is outside the web. And this brings humility. You stop assuming you know what others are carrying. You stop judging so quickly. You begin to ask different questions, not "what's wrong with them?" but "what are they connected to that I cannot see?" You begin to listen for what is unspoken. You begin to honor the complexity of every being you meet. Interbeing also helps you face difficulty without despair. Because even when the world seems dark, when violence, hatred, or division dominate the news, you remember that this is not the whole story. There are still countless unseen acts of care, of courage, of resilience. The good is not louder, but it is always present. It lives in the web, in the daily choices of millions, in the quiet prayers, in the meals shared, in the people who do what's right when no one is watching. Thich Nhat Hanh's life was a living example of this. A monk, a poet, a peace activist worked tirelessly for justice, but always from a place of deep stillness. He never separated inner peace from outer action. For him, mindfulness was not a private escape, it was a way of walking through the world in harmony with all life. To breathe in awareness was to connect with the breath of the earth. To speak with care was to water seeds of trust in others. This is how interbeing becomes more than a philosophy. It becomes your way of being. You don't need to understand it all intellectually. You live it. You sense it. You begin to feel that your heartbeat is part of something larger, that your healing is the earth healing, that your laughter is the sky clearing, that your tears are part of the river flowing toward wholeness. And when you stumble, as you will, this view offers support. You are not alone in your confusion. Others have walked this path. Others are walking it now. You can lean on their presence, their wisdom, their compassion even if they are not physically beside you. The bodhisattvas, the ancestors, the community of the awakened, visible and invisible, are always here. The web holds you, even when you forget. You begin to live with more ease. Not because life is easy, but because you stop fighting it alone. You recognize the truth that your suffering is not separate, and therefore your healing is not separate either. You find the courage to ask for help, to offer help, to forgive, to rest, because all of it affects the whole. Even silence becomes part of the connection. You don't always need words to belong. You don't always need explanation to feel understood. Sometimes just being present is enough. Sometimes just walking together in quiet awareness says more than any conversation. Sometimes just being still with someone in their pain is the deepest act of love. This view also transforms how you see nature. You no longer relate to the earth as something separate to be used, but as part of your own body. The trees breathe out what you breathe in. The water you drink moves through everything that lives. You begin to care for the planet not because you should, but because it is part of you. Its well-being is your well-being. You also begin to relate to time differently. The past is not distant. The future is not out of reach. Every moment contains echoes of what came before and seeds of what will come next. Your presence now changes what unfolds later. Your healing ripples both backward and forward. Interbeing transcends time. It reminds you that your life is part of a continuum, that the love you offer now may reach someone generations from now. This creates trust. Trust not in quick fixes or certainty, but in the quiet power of presence. Trust that you are not separate from the intelligence of life. Trust that even when you don't know what to do, being present is enough. Trust that every small act of care helps mend the web. This doesn't make you naive, it makes you wise, because you see the suffering more clearly and you don't turn away. You stay, you breathe, you do what you can from where you are, and that is enough. You don't have to save the world, you just have to remember that you are never acting alone. Every choice you make to come back to presence, to compassion, to truth strengthens the web. It supports the healing of others. It makes space for connection to grow. And in that space, you are no longer lost. You are part of the movement. You are part of the breath. You are part of the earth, the sky, the rain, the people walking beside you. You are already part of everything. That is interbeing. And it is not something you have to earn. It is what you are. Once you recognize that you are not separate, that your life breathes through others and theirs through you, the question shifts from who am I to how am I showing up now? The truth of interbeing brings your attention fully to this moment, not to escape the world, but to fully join it, not to control it, but to meet it as it is. When you live from the understanding that everything is connected, your presence becomes more than awareness, it becomes alignment. This is where mindfulness becomes more than a tool. It becomes a path into harmony with the universe itself. Not because the universe demands something specific from you, but because when you are fully present, you naturally move in tune with it. The more aware you become, the more sensitive you are to the intelligence that flows through all things. You stop living by habit. You begin living by direct contact with life. Mindfulness of the present is not passive watching, it is active participation. It means paying full attention to what is here without the filters of past or future. You stop relating to now as a means to something else. You stop turning each moment into a stepping stone to the next. You arrive, and in that arrival, something profound opens up. Clarity. This clarity is not a thought, it is a direct seeing. You begin to understand without needing to analyze. You sense what needs to be done without calculating. You say the right thing without rehearsing. Not because you're perfect, but because you're in rhythm with the reality unfolding before you. You trust your steps because they come not from anxious thinking, but from grounded presence. This is what it means to be aligned not with your plans or expectations, but with the deeper movement of life itself. The moment you release your grip on how things should be and return to how they are, you open the doorway to flow. And flow is not random, it is intelligent, it carries within it the balance of all things. Mindfulness is the key that unlocks this balance. When you are mindful, you stop adding extra layers of resistance. You stop feeding the inner noise. You begin to witness your thoughts without becoming them. You feel emotions without being ruled by them. You make space for what's here, and in doing so, you make space for insight. Insight arises not from effort, but from stillness. When your attention is rooted in the present, you become more available to truth. You notice subtle patterns. You hear what is usually drowned out. You respond instead of reacting. This does not mean life becomes easy. It means you are no longer lost in confusion when it becomes hard. The universe is always moving toward balance, even when it appears chaotic. And when you meet it with full awareness, you align with that balancing force. Your presence becomes part of that healing current. You don't need to understand the whole picture. You need to stay close to what is true right now. This is why mindfulness is not a retreat from life. It is a full entry into it. When you are truly present, you stop operating from a fixed identity. You are no longer defending the past or fearing the future. You are available to life as it arises. And that availability is power, not the kind that dominates, but the kind that cooperates, that listens, that adapts. Mindfulness also shifts the way you relate to time. The future stops being a source of constant anxiety. The past stops being a weight you carry. You realize that the only place where life can actually be touched is here. Plans may still be made, but they are not clung to. Memories may still arise, but they are not mistaken for reality. You begin to live with one foot fully planted in the ground beneath you. And in that groundedness, there is peace. Not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer scattered. Your energy is no longer split across timelines. You are here, and because of that, you can act clearly, speak honestly, listen fully. You become trustworthy not just to others, but to yourself. Because you are no longer being pulled in 1,000 directions, this integrity is what brings depth to your presence. When you are mindful, you are not pretending to be calm, you are rooted in calm. You are not acting thoughtful, you are actually thinking with care. You are not managing impressions, you are living from truth. That alignment is felt, others sense it, the world responds to it. This is where trust in universal intelligence deepens. Because the more you live in the present, the more you notice that you are not guiding everything on your own. Some moments unfold with perfect timing, even without your control. Some answers arrive when you stop trying to force them. Some doors open when you pause long enough to see them. These are not coincidences. They are the natural result of living in alignment with the present. When you're mindful, life feels less like something to figure out and more like something to participate in. You begin to sense that every moment is offering something, not just pleasure or pain, but teaching, direction, an invitation to come closer to the center of your own awareness. The more present you are, the more clearly you hear that invitation. Even in discomfort, presence helps you stay grounded. You stop needing to fix everything right away. You stay with the feeling. You allow it to teach you, to move through you, to soften you. This kind of patience is powerful. It's not passive, it's transformative. It changes your nervous system. It retrains your mind. It teaches your heart how to open in the middle of uncertainty. When you're truly present, you don't need to perform. You are enough as you are. This releases so much inner tension. You don't have to constantly seek validation. You don't have to chase meaning. Meaning begins to arise naturally from the quality of your attention. Even simple acts of breath, a step, a kind word become meaningful when they are given your full awareness. And that awareness is contagious. When others are with you, they feel invited to slow down, to drop their masks, to be more real. Presence has that effect. It's not loud, it doesn't demand. But it changes the space. It reminds people of their own truth, of what matters, of the peace they've been too busy to feel. This is why mindfulness is more than self-help. It is service. It is how you contribute to the sanity of the world. In a culture obsessed with speed, your stillness becomes a form of rebellion. In a world driven by distraction, your attention becomes medicine. When you are here, truly here, you become a mirror for others to see themselves more clearly. Mindfulness also teaches you to let go of the need for control. You see that the more you cling, the more you suffer. But when you soften, life begins to support you in unexpected ways. This doesn't mean everything goes your way. It means you stop needing it to. You trust that even when plans fail, presence remains. That even when outcomes shift, your ability to respond does not. And in this way, mindfulness becomes your foundation, not a tool to reach for only in crisis, but a way of moving through every moment. You eat with attention. You speak with care. You listen without rushing to fix. You rest without guilt. You walk without needing to arrive. Each moment becomes complete, not because it's perfect, but because you are in it fully. This full presence transforms your inner landscape. Your thoughts begin to slow. Your emotions become less overwhelming. Your body feels more at ease. You begin to recognize the signs of disconnection and return before the spiral deepens. You build resilience not by hardening, but by staying soft in a clear way. Mindfulness is not about achieving some permanent state of peace. It's about returning again and again. Each breath is a return. Each pause is a homecoming. You stop needing to escape yourself. You begin to enjoy being with yourself, not because you are free of flaws, but because you are free of judgment. This self-acceptance is one of the deepest gifts of presence. When you're mindful, you don't edit yourself. You observe. You learn. You grow. Without shame, without comparison, without needing to be anywhere else. This creates an inner freedom that no external success can provide. And the more you live from that freedom, the more aligned your outer life becomes. You choose differently. You speak more truthfully. You spend your energy more wisely. You say no when needed. You say yes with your whole being. Your actions become clearer because they are rooted in this moment, not tangled in past wounds or future fears. Mindfulness of the present is how you join the natural intelligence of the universe. It is not mystical, it is deeply real. It is how trees grow, how rivers flow, how hearts beat. When you stop resisting what is here, you start moving in the same rhythm. And that rhythm carries you forward, not always where you planned, but always where you need to go. The universe does not speak in words, it speaks in moments. It speaks through feeling, through timing, through synchronicity, through the subtle shift that happens when you stop striving and start listening. Presence is how you hear it, and trust is what grows when you do. This trust is not blind, it is not passive, it is earned, breath by breath, through your willingness to show up now, not to get somewhere, but to be fully where you are. And in that being, everything changes. You don't have to understand the entire universe. You only need to be present for one breath. And from that breath, take one step. Fully here, fully alive, fully aligned. When you begin to live fully in the present, something unexpected starts to happen. Logic loses its tight grip. You no longer need everything to make sense in the old linear way. the heart begins to guide where the mind used to rule. A different kind of knowing starts to surface, one that can't be mapped or measured. And in that space, where clarity comes not from reason but from experience, trust takes root in a new way. A trust that isn't explained, a trust that is. This is where Zen points, not to answers, but to openings. Zen doesn't explain the world, it opens you to it. It doesn't offer step-by-step instructions, it throws you directly into what is and strips away the need to explain. And at the center of Zen's method are koans, those strange, poetic, sometimes shocking questions or statements that refuse to be solved by logic and demand to be lived instead. Koans aren't riddles, they're not puzzles to outsmart. They are tools meant to dislodge you from the trap of intellectual certainty. They are sharp enough to cut through concepts and gentle enough to return you to presence. A koan doesn't ask you to think harder, it asks you to let go, to feel, to become so present that the barrier between thinker and thought disappears. One of the most well-known koans is deceptively simple. What is the sound of one hand clapping? The mind rushes to solve it. It searches for answers, comparisons, ideas. But every attempt to explain it falls flat. That's the point. It's not designed to be understood in the usual way. It's meant to frustrate the logical mind so completely that it finally surrenders, and, in that surrender, something deeper wakes up. Koans work like a mirror. They reflect your mental habits back at you. They show how quickly you try to fix, grasp, explain. And when those strategies fail, they bring you face to face with the raw experience underneath. This moment, this breath, this not knowing. And when you stop running from that space, you find something surprising clarity that doesn't come from figuring out, but from dropping in. Trust begins there, not in solving, but in allowing. Not in certainty, but in direct contact with experience. Koans train you to live in paradox, not to escape contradiction, but to see through it. You stop needing life to fit into neat categories. You start to feel at home in mystery. And that's where real wisdom grows. A traditional koan might ask, without thinking of good or bad, who are you? At first, the mind freezes. It wants to analyze. It wants to reach for memory, for identity, for opinion. But the question pushes past those layers. Who are you when all the labels fall away? Not what do you believe? What do you know in your bones when thought is silent? This kind of questioning is not comfortable. It pulls the rug out from under your usual sense of self. But that's exactly what makes it powerful. Koans don't aim to make you feel safe. They aim to wake you up. And once you're awake, you begin to see that safety isn't found in having all the answers. It's found in learning to live deeply with the questions. Zen trusts the process. It doesn't rush. It doesn't explain the path. It gives you a koan, then waits for you to grow into it. The breakthrough never comes from force. It comes when resistance drops. When you stop trying to master the question and let the question dissolve the illusion of mastery. This mirrors life itself. Life is filled with events that defy logic, loss that doesn't make sense, joy that comes without reason, coincidences that speak louder than facts. Trying to control these things with logic only creates more tension. But when you begin to meet life, the way you meet a koan, curious, present, undefended, you start to feel a different kind of intelligence moving through everything. Koans also teach you to listen in a new way, not for information, but for resonance. You begin to feel when something is real, even if it can't be explained. You trust your inner response more than the outer structure. You start to live from the body, from the breath, from the gut, not as a rejection of thinking, but as a return to wholeness. In Zen practice, it's common to sit with a single koan for months, even years, not to arrive at a tidy conclusion, but to let the koan slowly dismantle your false beliefs. The longer you sit with it, the more you see your mind's patterns, the need to be right, the fear of silence, the craving for control, and slowly those patterns soften. This is how koans dissolve mental resistance. They don't argue with your ego, they make it irrelevant. They point to what cannot be named, only known. And in that knowing, you find something unshakable, no a concept, but a felt experience of truth, something stable beneath all the noise. When trust is rooted in logic, it crumbles under mystery. But when trust is rooted in presence, it thrives in the unknown. Koans prepare you for this. They teach you how to live without resolution, how to meet paradox with open hands, how to be still in the face of contradiction, not to escape the tension, but to rest inside it. This kind of spiritual training doesn't make you passive. It sharpens your awareness. It refines your ability to see what is real and to drop what is not. It teaches you how to move without needing constant reassurance. Because you no longer rely on external validation, you trust the depth you've touched within yourself. This trust becomes practical. It affects how you speak, how you decide, how you relate. You stop over-explaining. You speak from clarity. You act from alignment, even if others don't understand. You are no longer living to be understood. You are living from a place that understands. Zen calls this not knowing mind. It's not ignorance, it's openness. It's the willingness to admit, I don't know, and to remain steady there. Not knowing mind doesn't mean you give up on truth. It means you stop pretending to own it. You let it reveal itself in its own time, in its own way. And when it does, it's not something you can explain to others. It's something you become. This is why Zen is often quiet. It doesn't need to prove. It doesn't need to convert. It trusts that silence speaks, that presence teaches. That paradox contains its own kind of answer, not one that satisfies the intellect, but one that calms the soul. Koans train you to stop searching for life in thoughts and to start living it fully, here and now. They prepare you for the moments that can't be explained, only felt. The kind of moments where words fall short but meaning is everywhere. The kind of moments where your only task is to be fully present and let life unfold through you. This kind of presence requires courage, the courage to stop needing certainty, the courage to rest in discomfort, the courage to say, this doesn't make sense, but I trust it. Koans build that courage, one paradox at a time. In everyday life, this shows up as greater calm. You stop rushing to fix things that aren't broken. You stop needing to resolve every conversation. You allow tension to exist without making it wrong. You let life be messy without losing your center. And that centeredness becomes a gift to yourself and to everyone around you. Over time, koan practice becomes more than meditation. It becomes your way of meeting the world. Every experience becomes a kind of koan. How do you respond to change without clinging? How do you love without needing possession? How do you act wisely in a world that makes no promises? You don't answer these with words. You answer with your life. And in that answer, trust deepens not as a belief, but as a natural state. You stop waiting to feel safe and start knowing you are already supported. Not by logic, but by presence. Not by certainty, but by alignment with what is. Koans don't take you away from life. They take you deeper into it. They don't teach you what to think. They show you how to see. And once you see, you don't need to understand everything. You need only to live it, one breath at a time, with both feet on the ground and your heart wide open. This is the power of Zen. This is the power of the question that can't be answered, and the trust that grows when you stop needing one. The more you allow paradox to soften your thinking, the more you start to feel at ease inside what used to confuse you. You no longer need everything to fit neatly together. You stop expecting life to follow your timelines. You begin to see that truth doesn't always arrive in answers. Sometimes it arrives in the quiet acceptance that there is no answer, at least not yet. And from this space, a new possibility emerges, not just surviving uncertainty, but learning from it, trusting it, even walking with it as a guide. Buddhism never promised certainty. It doesn't pretend to erase the unknown. Instead, it meets it directly and calls it part of the path. It names impermanence as truth. It teaches that nothing is fixed, not your thoughts, not your feelings, not your circumstances. And instead of resisting this, it invites you to lean in, to see that the very thing the mind fears, the shifting, the unraveling, the unpredictability, is not a problem to solve, but a truth to understand. This understanding begins with acceptance, not the kind that gives up, but the kind that sees clearly. Uncertainty is not a mistake in the design. It is the nature of all things. When you accept that, you stop trying to force life into shape. You stop waiting for a perfect plan. You begin to live in a deeper rhythm that listens more than it demands. Uncertainty brings discomfort because the mind craves control. It wants to know what's next. It wants to protect itself with stories and expectations. But life doesn't follow those scripts. And when reality contradicts the plan, suffering begins. Buddhism shows that this suffering comes not from the unknown itself, but from our resistance to it. When you loosen that resistance, fear begins to fade. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop gripping. You still make choices. You still set intentions. But you do so with openness, with the understanding that outcomes are not yours to dictate. That effort matters, but control is an illusion. You begin to move with life instead of pushing against it. This shift changes how you experience anxiety. When uncertainty no longer feels like a threat, your nervous system begins to relax. You start to see the mind's spirals not as truth, but as habitual reactions. You learn to pause, to feel the discomfort without feeding the panic, to stay present with the space between what is and what will be. Staying present in uncertainty is a form of deep trust, not in a specific outcome, but in your ability to meet what comes, in your inner capacity to respond, to adjust, to begin again. This is what the Buddha pointed to again and again, not the end of change, but the end of clinging. That's where freedom lives. Not in getting what you want, but in no longer needing to know what's next in order to be at peace. Uncertainty also opens you to creativity. When you stop forcing one path, you see many. When you let go of rigid definitions, you discover new perspectives. What felt like loss becomes space. What felt like failure becomes a pivot. What felt like being stuck becomes a pause filled with potential. The unknown stops being empty. It becomes alive with unseen possibilities. This is why presence is essential. When you're not present, the mind rushes ahead. It builds stories filled with fear, fueled by assumptions. But when you stay in this moment, you see that right now, you are okay. You are breathing. You are supported by the earth beneath you. And the next step doesn't have to be clear before you take it. Buddhism doesn't teach you to avoid change. It teaches you to move with it. Like water flowing around obstacles, you learn to stay fluid, to adapt, to meet each experience with openness, not as a challenge to your stability, but as part of your deepening. Each time you surrender the need to know, you make space for wisdom to emerge. And this wisdom isn't loud. It's not made of big answers. It's made of clarity that arises slowly, breath by breath. You begin to listen more deeply, not just to your thoughts, but to your body, your intuition, your surroundings. You stop waiting for certainty and start building trust from the inside out. Trust in this way is not passive, it's a discipline. It asks you to keep returning to presence when fear pulls you away. It asks you to keep showing up even when outcomes are uncertain. It asks you to feel your vulnerability without shutting down, and the more you do, the more resilient you become, not because you've eliminated the unknown, but because you've learned how to stand inside it. In this space, vulnerability stops being weakness. It becomes connection. You realize that everyone is walking with uncertainty, even if they hide it. You stop comparing your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel. You stop assuming you're the only one who doesn't have it figured out. This softens your judgments. It brings compassion. It reminds you that being human is not about certainty, it's about presence. Buddhism speaks of beginner's mind, a way of approaching each moment with openness, with the humility of not knowing. This attitude transforms your relationship to growth. You stop pretending you're supposed to be ahead. You stop rushing toward clarity. You start listening to what life is actually asking of you, not in the abstract, but right here, right now. This attitude builds stability, not because it controls the future, but because it meets each moment without needing to escape it. You stop fearing change because you've practiced resting in the unknown. You've seen that even when the ground shifts, you don't fall. You find your footing again, again, and again. This is how you develop inner confidence, no in outcomes, but in your own presence. Not in being certain, but in being real. And when you live from that place, others feel it. Your calm becomes a mirror. Your steadiness becomes a reminder. Your openness invites trust. When you stop needing to know, you begin to see. You notice the subtle cues life offers, the soft pull of intuition, the timing of an encounter, the way silence speaks louder than answers. These are the signals you miss when you're caught in overthinking. But when you relax into not knowing, they become clear. This shift also changes how you make decisions. You stop trying to guarantee success. You start listening for alignment. You make the best choice with the information you have, then let go. You trust that even if it turns out differently than you hoped, you will still grow. You stop needing each decision to be final. You understand that you can always adjust, always begin again. Buddhist practice encourages inquiry, not to find one final truth, but to become more curious about what is. Curiosity replaces fear. Wonder replaces anxiety. You start to ask better questions. What am I learning here? What is this showing me about myself? What needs to be felt, not fixed? These questions don't always have quick answers, but they open the heart. And when the heart is open, you no longer contract in uncertainty. You breathe into it. You trust that you are part of a larger unfolding, even if you can't see the full design. You begin to experience faith not as belief in a story, but as the ability to stay with what is real without running away. Faith in this form is deeply grounded. It doesn't need to be defended. It doesn't close off to new experience. It grows stronger the more you live from it. Each time you meet uncertainty with presence, faith deepens. Each time you hold discomfort without shutting down, faith expands. And over time, this becomes your new foundation. Buddhism also reminds you that clinging is the source of suffering. Clinging to fixed outcomes, clinging to identities, clinging to what once worked but no longer fits. Letting go doesn't mean losing. It means creating space. Space for what is real now, space for new ways of being, space for transformation. And transformation rarely comes in certainty. It comes in moments of disorientation, of shedding, of stepping into the unknown. These moments feel like loss, but they are openings. They invite you to trust something deeper than your plan. They show you how much you've grown. They ask you to keep moving forward, even when the way isn't lit. This is why Buddhist practice is not about escaping life. It's about entering it fully, without filters, without false promises, with your whole self. You stop needing to shield yourself from change. You learn to bow to it, to let it shape you, to let it reveal what can only be seen in the space between certainty and surrender. Uncertainty is no longer the enemy. It becomes the practice, the teacher, the path itself. And when you begin to trust that path, you realize something important. You don't need to know everything. You only need to be present for what is here. The future unfolds from that presence. The answers rise from that stillness. The freedom lives in your willingness to stay, with open hands, with a quiet breath, with a heart wide enough to hold the unknown. Learning to stay present inside uncertainty is no small act. It reshapes everything. You stop demanding that life fit your timeline and start listening to the unfolding itself. You begin to sense that the unknown is not a punishment, but a space of creation. In this new relationship with not knowing, a deeper trust begins to form that reaches beyond moments and into entire lifetimes. Because it's here that the teachings point even further, not just to this moment, but to the whole cycle of being, to something called samsara. Samsara is the cycle of birth and death, gain and loss, hope and disappointment. It is the wheel that turns again and again, moving through joy, pain, growth, decay. In Buddhist teaching, this is not a mistake or a flaw, it is the very nature of conditioned existence. But it is not something to escape through denial. It is something to understand deeply, and in that understanding, find freedom. Often, when people hear the word samsara, they think of suffering. And yes, there is suffering, but suffering is only one layer. Samsara also contains everything that has shaped you, softened you, opened your heart. It includes every challenge that brought you insight, every ending that revealed your strength, every failure that humbled you into real wisdom. To trust samsara is to trust the process not just in theory, but through the lived experience of falling, rising, and falling again. This trust isn't passive. It is built slowly, through awareness and reflection. When you start to pay attention to the patterns of your life, you begin to see that nothing stays still. The grief that once felt endless shifts over time. The fear that held you back eventually loses its grip. The story that once defined you becomes just another chapter. Samsara shows that everything moves, even the things you thought would never change. This movement is not random. It is governed by cause and effect, by intention and consequence, by effort and timing. But most of all, it is governed by impermanence. When you resist this truth, the cycle becomes painful. When you align with it, the cycle becomes a teacher. Buddhism never asks you to bypass suffering. It invites you to see it clearly, to walk through it with presence and curiosity. One of the most powerful shifts on the path is when you stop seeing suffering as something going wrong and start seeing it as a moment of transformation. This doesn't mean you romanticize pain or seek it out. It means you stop turning away from it. You begin to notice what it's asking of you, where it's pointing, what it's trying to teach. In samsara, you don't stay in one state forever. Everything is in motion. Even your resistance is moving. Even your numbness is part of the process. When you trust that, you stop needing to rush through the hard parts. You stay long enough to understand them. You let them shape you in a deeper way. And what's shaped in that fire doesn't burn, it strengthens. This is why the Buddhist path speaks of rebirth, not just the literal cycle across lifetimes, but the inner rebirth that happens when you let go of the old, when you die to what no longer serves and open to what's waiting beneath. Rebirth doesn't mean forgetting the past. It means allowing yourself to begin again without being chained to it. Every time you meet your suffering with compassion, something new begins. Every time you stop blaming and start listening, the cycle shifts. You're not repeating for the sake of repetition. You're being shown where freedom is still possible. Samsara is not there to trap you. It's there to show you what you have not yet seen clearly. Every loop brings you closer to awareness if you are willing to look with open eyes. The more you walk this path, the more you begin to recognize the difference between pain that teaches and pain that repeats because of unawareness. You start seeing your patterns not as personal flaws, but as echoes of cause and effect. You see the places where you keep touching the same hot stove, hoping it will stop burning. And you start to ask deeper questions, not, "Why is this happening to me?" but, "What am I still holding on to?" This questioning doesn't always lead to instant relief, but it leads to depth. And from depth, real transformation becomes possible. You stop trying to skip ahead. You realize that the same patterns return until they are met with full attention. Samsara becomes your classroom, not because it is perfect, but because it is honest. It shows you what you believe, what you avoid, what you're still clinging to. The Buddha taught that awakening doesn't happen by running away from the cycle, but by understanding it, by becoming so familiar with its movements that you no longer get swept away by them. You learn to stand in the middle of the storm and still see clearly, to feel deeply without drowning, to hold space for both beginnings and endings without trying to control them. This changes how you see others. You realize they too are moving through cycles. They too are being shaped by forces you cannot see. This brings empathy. You stop expecting people to be further along than they are. You start holding space for their process, just as you hold space for your own. This doesn't mean you allow harm. It means you stop taking their behavior personally. You understand they are caught in their own wheel. And the wheel is not endless for its own sake. It spins until the lesson is learned, until the view changes, until you no longer need to repeat that specific story. That's how samsara becomes wisdom. Each turn brings a new angle, a new insight, a new layer of clarity. You stop seeing the repetition as failure. You start seeing it as refinement. When you live with this view, you stop demanding that life be free of difficulty. You start using difficulty as a mirror. You stop asking for comfort as a condition for peace. You begin to find peace in your ability to stay open, no matter what the cycle brings. Even when it brings loss, even when it brings change, you trust that the wheel keeps turning and that you will keep growing. Samsara doesn't make you small. It humbles you. It strips away what you thought would save you and leaves only what actually matters. Presence, compassion, wisdom. These are not abstract qualities. They are forged in the cycle through heartbreak, confusion, hope, and clarity, through the willingness to face yourself again and again, even when it hurts. When you trust samsara, you stop seeing life as a problem to solve. You start seeing it as a rhythm to follow. You begin to understand that the low points are not the end. They are the depth from which the next season begins. Just as winter carries the seed of spring, your darkness carries the seed of awakening. But only if you stay, only if you listen. In this way, suffering becomes sacred. Not because it's desired, but because it becomes useful. It becomes part of the path, not separate from awakening, but woven into it. You begin to see that even in your most painful moments, something was being revealed. Something was being asked of you, to let go, to forgive, to change direction, to open more fully to the truth. Rebirth in this view is not about escaping. It's about returning again and again to your own inner clarity, to the awareness that does not change even as everything else does. The more you return, the less you fear the cycle. You know it is not final. You know it moves. You know you can meet it with steadiness and softness without needing to run. This steadiness becomes your strength. You stop getting thrown off balance by every twist. You see the pattern, and you step more lightly. You make choices that align with your deeper values, not with your old habits. You begin to turn the wheel with intention, not to escape it, but to participate in it wisely. And when you fall again, as everyone does, you don't collapse. You remember that this is part of it too, that every setback is part of the unfolding, that healing isn't linear, that freedom isn't perfection. It's the ability to keep going with open eyes and a soft heart through every chapter. You start seeing yourself not as broken, but as becoming, not as failing, but as learning, not as stuck, but as ripening. Samsara is the field where awakening grows, not in spite of suffering, but through it, not by avoiding the cycle, but by trusting it. Trusting that even in pain, you are being shaped. Trusting that even in confusion, something in you still sees. Trusting that this moment, however difficult, is part of something far larger, something that is not finished with you yet. And in that trust, you continue, with presence, with purpose, with faith in the cycle and your place within it. As you learn to trust the turning of the cycle, you begin to notice something else, something quieter but just as real. It's not just that life moves through you. It's that your inner world also shapes the way life moves around you. The more clearly you see, the more clearly the world responds. When you soften, so do your experiences. When you resist, resistance shows up in everything. This is not a metaphor, it is a living truth. The universe does not only deliver events, it reflects your state of mind. And how you meet what happens changes what happens next. This reflection is not reward or punishment, it is resonance. In Tibetan Buddhism, this understanding is woven into every teaching. The outer world is not separate from the inner. There is no firm line between what you carry inside and what shows up outside. The world becomes a mirror not of who you wish you were, but of who you are in this moment. Not the roles, not the performance, but the actual energy you move from. When the mind is clouded with fear, everything seems unstable. When the heart is guarded, every interaction feels distant. But when you trust, even quietly, the world begins to respond differently. Not because you control it, but because you're finally aligned with it. This alignment is not forceful. It is not about manifesting desires or bending outcomes. It's about seeing that your perception creates the texture of your life. Perception is not neutral. It is filtered through belief, emotion, memory, and expectation. When you believe you are unsafe, even neutral situations feel threatening. When you believe you are unworthy, kindness can seem suspicious. But when you begin to trust your own awareness, when you rest in clarity, the world shifts not because the facts have changed, but because your relationship to them has. This is the essence of the cosmic mirror. The universe reflects back what you bring to it. When your thoughts are racing, the day feels chaotic. When you slow down, clarity returns. When you bring presence to your relationships, connection deepens. The mirror doesn't lie, it simply reflects. And the reflection teaches if you are willing to look with honesty. This is not always comfortable. Sometimes the mirror shows patterns you'd rather not see. But this is where growth begins. Not in denying what arises, but in seeing it as an invitation. If the outer world feels tense, maybe the inner world needs softening. If the same conflict keeps showing up, maybe the way you respond is ready to change. Life doesn't attack, it reveals. And what it reveals is always pointing back to something you are ready to meet. In this view, every experience becomes a chance to understand yourself more deeply, not through analysis, but through presence. You don't need to judge what you see. You simply need to notice. The reaction, the emotion, the trigger, they're all signals. They point to what you believe, what you expect, and what you're carrying. And as you become more aware, the reflection shifts. The universe starts to respond to your awareness instead of your fear. This is why trust matters. Not blind trust, but embodied trust. The kind that grows when you begin to live more honestly, when you stop performing and start feeling, when you stop trying to manipulate outcomes and start aligning with what's real. That trust changes your vibration not in a mystical way, but in a practical one. It changes your posture, your choices, your tone, your presence. And that presence shapes what comes next. This is also why your inner state can't be separated from your path. If you want peace, cultivate it within. If you want clarity, drop the noise. If you want connection, soften your walls. The world doesn't give you what you demand. It meets you where you are. This is not a rule-eats, a law of resonance. It is how energy works. It is how life speaks. Tibetan teachings describe the mind as a projector. Your inner images, your thoughts, your beliefs, these are the slides. The world becomes the screen. If you don't recognize the projection, you keep reacting to the image as if it's objective truth. But when you recognize the source, you gain freedom. You stop blaming the screen. You adjust the lens. You change the slide. This doesn't mean you control reality. It means you shape how you meet it, and that changes everything. When you meet the moment with fear, you brace. When you meet it with openness, you adapt. When you meet it with love, even difficulty becomes a teacher. This is not about fixing your emotions. It's about being aware of the ones that are leading. It's about choosing your posture before the next step. The mirror also reflects your unconscious. The parts of you that you ignore or suppress still speak through what life brings. If there is unprocessed grief, it will show up in your relationships. If there is hidden anger, it will leak into your decisions. This is not punishment. It is the natural movement of energy seeking balance. The universe is not trying to expose you, it's trying to wake you. When you begin to meet these reflections with curiosity instead of shame, change becomes possible. You stop needing to protect the old story. You start asking deeper questions. What is this situation showing me? What belief is being mirrored? What would shift if I met this moment with more kindness? This awareness doesn't make you passive, it makes you powerful. Because now your choices are based on clarity, not reactivity. You're not just repeating the same loops. You're pausing. You're seeing. You're creating space for something new to emerge. And in that space, the universe reflects something different back. You also stop taking things so personally. When someone projects their pain, you don't absorb it. You see it as their own reflection, their own unfinished story. This doesn't mean you accept harm. It means you hold stronger boundaries with less resentment. You don't need to retaliate. You simply step out of the cycle. You choose a new frequency, and the mirror adjusts. Even your external circumstances begin to feel different. Not because they always improve, but because you are no longer at war with them. A delayed plan becomes time to reflect. A difficult conversation becomes a chance to practice compassion. A disappointment becomes space for realignment. These shifts are not magical, they are rooted in presence. They come from being willing to meet what is without resisting it. And as you live this way, something deeper starts to unfold. You stop searching outside for meaning. You realize that meaning comes from how you meet the moment. You stop needing signs to tell you what to do. You become the sign. Your own clarity becomes your compass. Your own peace becomes your path. This is how trust transforms perception, not through force, but through alignment. You begin to trust that whatever is showing up is connected to something in you, that the next step becomes clear when you stop trying to control the outcome. That the universe, when met with awareness, becomes a partner, not an obstacle. This partnership is built on honesty. You can't hide from the mirror. You can only decide how you meet what it shows, with blame or with curiosity, with avoidance or with attention, with fear or with faith. The choice is always yours, and the reflection responds accordingly. Even in moments of silence, when nothing seems to be happening, the mirror is still active. It's responding to your energy, your openness, your attention. What you hold inside is already shaping what's on its way. That's not pressure, it's power. It means your state of being is the most important place to start. So, you begin there, with your breath, with your posture, with your thoughts. You check in, you notice, you adjust. Not to be perfect, but to be real. Not to manipulate the mirror, but to walk with integrity. Because when you walk that way, the reflection shifts. You don't have to chase validation. You receive resonance. You don't have to force progress. It unfolds naturally from presence. This is how Tibetan Buddhism teaches transformation, not by escaping life, but by meeting it from within. Not by controlling every detail, but by tending to your own clarity. The more you clear the lens, the more clearly life speaks. And when you trust what it shows, you start to grow in a new direction, not toward perfection, but toward wholeness. The cosmic mirror is always here. Every situation, every relationship, every reaction. It's not testing you, it's showing you. And when you're ready to see, even the most difficult reflections become part of your awakening. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this showing me about how I show up?" And when you ask that, you're no longer a victim of reflection. You become a co-creator of what comes next. The more clearly you begin to see how the universe reflects your state of being, the more you understand that life is not asking you to control it. It's asking you to meet it. Not with force, but with alignment. Not with perfection, but with presence. When you push, the mirror pushes back. When you resist, it resists too. But when you move with clarity, effort begins to feel different. It's no longer a struggle to prove or chase or hold on. It becomes something steady, intentional, and free of tension. This is what Buddhist practice calls right effort. Right effort is not about pushing harder. It's not about trying to get ahead at any cost. It's the opposite of forcing. It's the energy of sincerity without strain, of dedication without obsession. It is how you move when your actions come from trust rather than fear. It is the quality of effort that arises when your inner state is aligned with your values, not with your attachments. Effort, by itself, isn't always helpful. Effort can be exhausting when it's fueled by insecurity or urgency. When you try to control results, even with good intentions, you often tighten. You overwork. You become fixated on outcomes, and in that state, it's easy to lose your balance. You might achieve things, but the process drains you. You're constantly measuring your worth by results, never quite at rest. Right effort moves differently. It comes from awareness, not anxiety, from purpose, not pressure. It arises naturally when your mind is steady and your heart is clear. It knows the difference between what you can influence and what you cannot. It's effort without grasping, work without struggle, progress without self-punishment. In the Eightfold Path, right effort is described as the energy to prevent unwholesome states from arising, to abandon those already present, to develop wholesome states, and to maintain the ones that have already begun. It's not about chasing success or forcing change. It's about tending to the mind the way you would tend to a garden. You remove what chokes your growth. You water what supports it. You act with care, and you allow space for results to unfold. This requires patience. You don't see the fruit the same day you plant the seed. And yet, in modern life, we are trained to expect immediate results. We tie effort to outcomes as if effort is only valuable when it gives us what we want. But right effort teaches otherwise. It says the process itself matters, the intention matters. The quality of your presence matters, regardless of how things turn out. This shift is not about lowering your goals. It's about moving from clarity instead of compulsion. When you act from right effort, you're not trying to force life into a shape. You're working in harmony with how things are. You listen before you act. You check your motivation. You choose what is skillful, not just what is efficient. And in doing so, you conserve your energy. You move with the rhythm of what's real. This rhythm is not always fast. Sometimes right effort looks like resting. Sometimes it looks like doing less. Knowing when to stop is just as important as knowing when to begin. Right effort includes discernment. It asks you to pay attention not just to what you're doing, but to how you're doing it. Are you pushing from fear? Are you rushing to avoid discomfort? Or are you acting from grounded intention? These questions don't slow you down. They guide you. They help you bring your whole self into what you do. And when you do that, your actions begin to carry a different energy. They feel cleaner. You become less attached to results because you trust the process. You know that even if things don't go the way you hoped, your effort still mattered. It shaped you. It strengthened your integrity. It refined your path. Right effort also teaches you to recognize when effort becomes attachment. When your actions turn into obsession or resistance, it's a sign to pause, to step back, not to quit, but to realign. Sometimes the most powerful shift is not doing more eights, letting go of the need for a specific outcome. This isn't giving up. It's returning to center, trusting that when you do what is yours to do, the rest will follow in its own time. This doesn't mean you stop planning. It means you hold your plans lightly. You set goals, but you don't make your peace depend on them. You take steps, but you leave room for change. You stay flexible, responsive, open to surprise. Right effort allows for life to speak back. It's not rigid. It moves in relationship to what's real. This kind of effort also respects the body. It doesn't ignore pain signals or run on burnout. It values sustainability over intensity. It listens for when you need to rest, to nourish, to slow down. And it trusts that rest is not weakness. That sometimes the most skillful action is pausing long enough to feel what's true before the next move. This level of self-awareness creates steadiness. You stop swinging between extremes. You're no longer caught in cycles of overexertion, followed by collapse. You begin to live in balance. Your energy becomes more consistent. You're not always chasing. You're not always recovering. You're simply moving in rhythm with what is needed now. Right effort also transforms how you deal with failure. Because when you're not forcing outcomes, failure loses its sting. It becomes feedback, not self-judgment. You learn, you adjust, you try again. There's no drama, no collapse. Just the quiet commitment to stay on the path, to keep showing up, even when the results are unclear. This teaches humility, not the kind that makes you small, but the kind that helps you see clearly. You stop needing to prove yourself. You act because it's the right thing to do, not because it will earn approval. Your actions become an offering, a contribution. You move from service rather than ego, and that shift changes everything. Others begin to feel it too. Your presence becomes more trustworthy. Your words carry more weight. Not because you are louder, but because you are aligned. People sense that you're not trying to get something from them, that you're not reacting, you're rooted. And that rootedness is what gives your effort power. This kind of effort also sharpens your discipline, no through force, but through purpose. You don't need motivation tricks when your energy is aligned. You don't need to hype yourself up when your values are clear. Discipline becomes natural when your actions flow from what matters most to you. And yet, right effort is never rigid. It includes compassion. You allow yourself to be human, to have off days, to make mistakes. You don't turn discipline into punishment. You turn it into care. You hold yourself accountable, but with gentleness. You start again, not because you failed, but because you're still growing. Over time, right effort becomes your default. You stop chasing intensity and start choosing consistency. You stop reacting to every setback and start responding with presence. You stop needing everything to happen quickly and start trusting that steady steps create real change. This is how right effort builds resilience. Not the kind that endures without feeling, but the kind that adapts, that learns, that stays connected. You begin to trust that you don't have to fight your way to peace. You can walk there. You can arrive breath by breath, step by step, by staying true to what is real. Right effort doesn't promise comfort. It promises alignment. It doesn't protect you from difficulty. It helps you meet it with strength. It doesn't remove uncertainty. It teaches you how to move through it with grace. In this way, effort stops being about what you achieve. It becomes about who you become. Not in the eyes of others, but in the quiet of your own heart. You know you showed up fully. You know you moved with care. You know you stayed connected to what matters. And that is enough. That is the path. One step, one breath, one honest effort at a time. As right effort softens your need to control outcomes, you begin to feel the deeper ground underneath all striving, the truth that everything you build, everything you experience, everything you become is touched by change. You can act with clarity and walk with care, but none of it is permanent. Even the most meaningful progress will one day pass. This realization isn't cause for despair, it's an opening, a call to deepen your trust, not just in life's unfolding, but in its fading. And nowhere is this invitation clearer than in the 5 remembrances. The 5 remembrances are simple phrases spoken in Buddhist tradition, not to frighten, but to awaken. They are reflections on impermanence, illness, aging, death, and the truth that all we love will eventually change. At first glance, they seem heavy, but their purpose is not to weigh the heart down. Their purpose is to open it. Because when you remember what is inevitable, you stop pretending you have endless time. You stop living in avoidance. You begin to meet your life with more honesty. The first remembrance: I am of the nature to grow old. There is no way to escape growing old. This is not just about physical age. It's about understanding that everything, body, identity, memory, will shift. Aging is not failure, it is movement. It is a reminder that nothing in form will stay the same. And this can either cause fear or clarity. When you accept aging, you begin to live in better rhythm with reality. You stop clinging to youth. You stop measuring worth by what fades. You start honoring the wisdom that comes with change. You start showing up now, instead of waiting for later. The second remembrance: I am of the nature to become ill. There is no way to escape illness. This is not a sentence of doom. It's a reminder that vulnerability is not a flaw in the system, it's a part of it. Your body will have limits. It will ache. It will sometimes break down. And rather than resenting this, you can begin to care for it differently. Illness brings awareness to what has been ignored. It slows you down when you've been moving too fast. It teaches compassion not just for yourself, but for others who walk through pain. When you accept that health is not guaranteed, you begin to value it more. You start to make choices from care rather than denial. The third remembrance: I am of the nature to die. There is no way to escape death. This is the truth that most people spend their lives avoiding. But Buddhism does not turn away from it. It faces it gently, directly, with full awareness. Death is not a threat, it is part of the rhythm of all things. And when you stop fearing it, you begin to live more honestly. You speak what matters. You listen more closely. You let go of the little battles that don't need to be fought. Death reminds you that time is precious, not to be rushed through, but to be lived with attention. Every breath becomes more meaningful when you remember you will not breathe forever. The fourth remembrance. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There is no way to escape being separated from them. This truth is tender. It touches the softest places in the heart. It brings up grief and fear, but also love. Because when you truly understand impermanence, your love deepens. You stop taking people for granted. You start saying what needs to be said. You hold others not with ownership, but with gratitude. When you know things will change, you stop waiting for the perfect moment. You begin to show up in the moments you have, which is the only way real connection is built. The fifth remembrance. My actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand. This final truth brings everything into focus. It's not your status, your appearance, your titles, or your plans that follow you. It's how you live, how you speak, how you treat others, how you show up when no one is watching. In a world that changes constantly, this is what remains. Your choices shape not just your outer life, but your inner peace. The more clearly you see this, the more mindfully you live. Not out of fear, but out of respect for your own path. These remembrances are not meant to create dread. They are meant to strip away illusion. The illusion that we have forever. The illusion that we can avoid loss. The illusion that life is only good when it is easy. By turning toward what is uncomfortable, you begin to uncover a deeper peace. A peace that does not depend on everything going your way. A peace that lives in alignment with truth. When you reflect on these truths regularly, your trust expands not in permanence, but in presence. You stop trying to outrun change. You stop fighting what is natural. You learn to walk with it, to meet it with courage, to use it as a guide. This trust is not passive, it is active. It means living with intention because you know that time is short. It means loving fully because you know people change. It means showing up today, not someday. It means releasing resentment faster because you realize the cost of holding on. It means choosing integrity because your actions are your only true shelter. This kind of reflection also helps with fear. Fear of death loses power when you look directly at it. Fear of aging softens when you understand its place in the cycle. Fear of loss becomes more bearable when you allow yourself to feel it fully. These truths don't hurt you. They liberate you from the belief that life should be different than it is. In Tibetan practice, meditating on death is considered essential not to darken the heart, but to clear it, to remove distraction, to wake you up, to remind you of what matters, to help you stop living as if you have endless time. The fear of death shrinks when you live in alignment with what you value. When you know you're not holding back, when you know you've given what you came to give. This is what the remembrances offer, not despair, but courage. The courage to stop waiting, to start loving, to forgive, to listen, to act. They push you into a deeper kind of honesty. One that doesn't waste time, one that doesn't pretend, one that lives close to the heart. Trust deepens here, not trust in safety, but trust in reality. Not trust in guarantees, but trust in your ability to meet life as it is. You stop needing to know what happens next. You start focusing on how you meet what's here, That's where freedom lives, not in control, but in full contact with truth. This reflection also brings tenderness. You begin to feel how fragile everything is, not in a hopeless way, but in a sacred way. You stop being careless with your time, your words, your attention. You start to hold the moment as something precious, because it is, and because you know it will pass. You also stop pretending that you're separate from others. When you reflect on your own aging, illness, and death, you recognize these truths in everyone. This brings empathy, it brings connection. It helps you meet others, not from judgment, but from shared humanity. You stop needing people to be perfect. You see that they, too, are doing their best in a changing world. And slowly, this awareness transforms your entire approach to life. You stop needing things to last forever. You start making the most of what you have. You begin to live in rhythm with impermanence. You let go more easily. You say thank you more often. You laugh even when the future is unclear. You cry without apology. You live without holding back. This is the depth the 5 remembrances offer. A different kind of stability, a different kind of peace. One that is built not on promises, but on presence, not on avoidance, but on understanding. Because once you accept what will change, you stop wasting energy resisting it. You start using your time wisely. You stop waiting to be ready. You start now. And that is how these 5 truths free you, by teaching you to trust not in what lasts, but in what is fully lived before it passes. When you open to the truth of impermanence and let the 5 remembrances settle into your awareness, something begins to shift. You no longer resist the nature of change, you move with it. You no longer search for permanence in things that are built to fade. And from that clarity, a new question begins to rise. If everything is always shifting, if loss is certain, if control is an illusion, how do you find peace in the middle of all this movement? The answer is not found in forcing stability, but in seeing the deeper order behind the motion. Not by trying to make chaos disappear, but by learning to recognize the harmony that is already inside it. This is where the mandala principle begins to speak. In Tibetan Buddhism, the mandala is not simply a piece of sacred art. It is a living map of reality. It shows the pattern hidden within complexity, the balance holding the center even when the outer world spins. At first glance, a mandala looks intricate, filled with shapes, colors, and symbols. But the more you sit with it, the more your eyes are drawn to the center. And from that center, every layer begins to make sense. This is not just a visual experience, it is a teaching. The mandala reveals that even within confusion, there is form. Even within suffering, there is movement toward wholeness. The chaos you see around you is not without structure. It only looks that way when you're focused on fragments. The mandala invites you to see from a wider view. You stop reacting to every detail, and you begin to see the pattern behind it. The seeming randomness of life starts to feel less like error and more like unfolding. You realize that what feels like disconnection may be part of a larger rhythm you can't yet see. This doesn't mean everything becomes easy. It means you stop feeling lost inside the temporary. You begin to trust the deep current moving beneath the surface. Trust, in this context, is not passive acceptance. It is grounded participation in something larger than your immediate reaction. You begin to act, speak, and respond from a sense of alignment rather than panic. You begin to trust that not everything will be understood immediately, but that doesn't mean it lacks meaning. The mandala principle teaches that reality has layers. There is the surface, what you experience day to day, with its joys, pressures, and surprises. Then there is the inner pattern, the deeper energy guiding those events into shape. That inner pattern doesn't operate on your timeline. It doesn't need your approval. But it is there, moving, shaping, responding to every action and intention. In this view, even disorder plays a role. It is not a sign of failure. It is often the breakdown before new balance appears. The moments of chaos are not outside the design. They are part of the recalibration. The mandala is not always symmetrical from where you stand, but if you shift your position, if you step back, you begin to see the harmony again. This perspective transforms how you meet crisis. You stop labeling everything that feels hard as wrong. You start asking what it is trying to show you. You stop fighting the unknown and start holding space for what is still forming. This is the wisdom of the mandala, knowing that order is not the absence of change, but the deeper intelligence inside the change. This doesn't mean becoming passive. It means acting from a different place. From trust in the pattern, not obsession with control. From a quiet center, not outer reaction. When your mind is still, the mandala becomes visible. Not outside of you, but within your own awareness. You begin to sense the shape your life is taking, not all at once, not with perfect clarity, but enough to stay grounded as you move forward. Tibetan monks create mandalas with sand grain by grain, hour after hour, sometimes over weeks. They work with precision, dedication, full presence. And when the mandala is finished, they destroy it. Not out of disrespect, but as a teaching. Even beauty passes, even perfect design returns to dust. But what remains is the energy, the discipline, the presence that built it. The mandala never dies. It transforms. This teaching invites you to live the same way, to pour your attention into what you are creating now. Not because it will last forever, but because the way you create it shapes you. Your choices may not result in permanent outcomes, but they leave a lasting imprint in your consciousness. How you show up becomes more important than what you achieve. You begin to see your life as a living mandala. Each thought, each relationship, each challenge is part of the design. You don't always see the shape clearly, but it's forming. You don't always know where a choice will lead, but you make it with awareness. You let the pattern emerge one layer at a time. And in this, trust grows. Not trust that everything will go your way, but trust that something meaningful is being made from every experience. You stop needing to rush toward clarity. You understand that the center holds, even when the outer rings are in motion. You begin to return to that center more often through meditation, through silence, through honest reflection. That return is what keeps the pattern stable. This stability is not external. It lives inside. It becomes your compass when everything else changes. It becomes your place of refuge when the outer world is loud. And the more you return, the more the outer world begins to reflect that inner order. You start noticing alignment where before you only saw tension. You start recognizing timing where before you only felt delay. The mandala also reminds you that you are not separate from the whole. Each piece matters. Each act of attention supports the balance of the greater pattern. You begin to treat your actions with reverence, not because you're trying to be perfect, but because you understand their place in the larger field. You stop dismissing the small things. You realize that everything you do contributes to the design. This brings integrity. It brings patience. It brings presence. You start to notice when you've stepped out of alignment, not with judgment, but with clarity. You gently bring yourself back. You stop needing everything to be resolved immediately. You begin to live in rhythm with unfolding. You listen more. You react less. You understand that time reveals the pattern, but only if you keep showing up with your whole self. This principle can guide every part of life. In relationships, it helps you hold space for complexity. You stop needing every conversation to reach perfect understanding. You begin to trust that connection deepens through presence, not resolution. In work, it reminds you to build with care, not urgency. You start prioritizing clarity over speed. In difficulty, it reminds you that chaos is often the beginning of reorganization, not the end of order. The mandala teaches that beauty comes not from perfection, but from coherence. When your actions reflect your values, when your speech reflects your intention, when your decisions reflect your awareness, you are in harmony. Even if the outcome is uncertain, the pattern is strong. Even if the world looks messy, your alignment becomes part of the greater balance. This view doesn't make you passive, it helps you participate more skillfully. You stop reacting from fear, you start acting from insight. You take responsibility not just for what you do, but for how you do it. And that how begins to ripple outward. Others feel it. The world responds to it. The pattern becomes visible again. And even when things fall apart, you no longer panic. You remember the monks and the sand. You remember that form fades, but essence remains. You trust that the cycle will begin again, that the center will still be there, that your presence will guide you to the next right step. The mandala principle doesn't erase difficulty, it holds it in context. It gives it a place inside the whole. It reminds you that the universe is not chaos dressed up as meaning. It is meaning expressed through change. It is order that includes disorder. It is beauty that includes shadow. It is truth that includes uncertainty. And when you trust that, you walk differently. You breathe more deeply. You speak more clearly. You move not from panic, but from wisdom. Because now you know, even in the middle of disorder, something steady holds. And your task is not to escape the chaos, but to stand in it with open eyes and help reveal the pattern waiting to be seen. Once you begin to recognize the patterns hidden within disorder, once you learn to see chaos not as error but as part of a greater rhythm, something deep within you begins to settle. The need to force, to fix, to rush dissolves. You no longer chase control, you listen, you align. And within that alignment, a different kind of energy begins to move on that has nothing to do with status or performance, and everything to do with the heart's intention. It is not calculated, it is not transactional. It is the simplest and most powerful force of connection. It is compassion. In Buddhist teachings, compassion is not a feeling you wait to have, it is a way of being that you choose to embody. It is considered the natural expression of wisdom. When you understand the impermanence of all things, when you see clearly the interconnectedness of all life, compassion is the response that arises, not as obligation, but as truth. It becomes your way of participating in the web of existence with integrity. Tibetan Buddhism often speaks of compassion as a kind of cosmic currency, not in a literal sense, but in a deeply spiritual one. The energy you release into the world returns to you not always through material outcomes, but through alignment, through clarity, through an inner knowing that you are living in harmony with the current of life. The more compassion you give, the more trust you feel, not because things always go your way, but because you know you are in right relationship with the whole. Compassion restores trust where logic fails. It bridges what division breaks. It allows you to stay open even when the mind wants to protect. In moments of doubt, compassion is what carries you forward, not because it solves the problem, but because it keeps your heart intact while you move through it. You begin to see that trust is not built from certainty, is built from care. Care for your own experience, and care for the experiences of others. When you act with compassion, your energy changes, your decisions become less reactive, your words soften, you listen more deeply, and this shift ripples into every space you enter. Compassion does not weaken your boundaries, it strengthens them. It allows you to say no without harshness. It lets you speak truth without harm. It transforms action into something more than effort. It becomes an offering. Compassion is not pity. It does not look down. It sees the other as an extension of itself. It recognizes suffering without trying to fix it out of discomfort. It holds space with presence, not pressure. It honors pain without needing to own it. And it creates conditions where healing can begin slowly, quietly, in the soil of non-judgment. This kind of compassion starts with yourself. Without it, everything else becomes performance. If you cannot meet your own pain with tenderness, your care for others will carry tension. When you begin to treat your struggles as part of the shared human experience, not as flaws to hide, your presence becomes more honest. You stop needing to prove your strength. You start showing up as you are, and in doing so, you give others permission to do the same. Self-compassion is not indulgence. It is discipline in its purest form. The discipline to stay when it hurts, to soften when you want to run, to forgive when the inner voice turns sharp. It is the foundation of all other forms of care. And when it is cultivated, you become trustworthy to yourself. That trust is unshakable because it is not based on outcome, it is based on the way you meet each moment. As compassion deepens, generosity naturally follows. You begin to give not out of pressure, but out of abundance. Not because you have extra, but because you recognize that everything you hold is already shared. Your time, your attention, your care, they are not diminished when offered. They expand. They grow stronger in the giving. This generosity isn't measured in grand gestures. It lives in the small moments, pausing to listen, offering kindness without being asked, holding back judgment, giving the benefit of the doubt. These acts create space where trust can grow, not just between people, but within the fabric of existence itself. Because what you give out reflects what you trust. If you believe the world is hostile, you guard yourself. If you believe it is indifferent, you withdraw. But when you begin to trust that life responds to presence, to sincerity, to compassion, your way of being changes. You move through the world not to defend, but to connect. Not to prove, but to contribute. In this view, every action becomes sacred. The way you speak, the way you listen, the way you walk through a room, all of it holds the energy you bring to it. Compassion makes that energy clean. It removes distortion, it opens the channel, and through that openness, clarity enters. You begin to see people differently, not as obstacles or extensions of your needs, but as beings in process, just like you. This understanding does not remove responsibility, it deepens it. Because now, you know that how you treat others shapes the atmosphere they live in. You begin to take responsibility for your impact, not just your intention. This awareness creates a kind of spiritual maturity. You stop blaming. You stop expecting others to carry your pain. You own your path. And yet, you remain open. You offer presence even when nothing can be fixed. You learn the art of holding space without needing to fill it. Compassion teaches you to trust silence, to trust the quiet support of simply being there. You no longer rush to say the right thing. You listen with your whole being. You let others feel seen. This listening becomes healing, not because you have answers, but because you are no longer afraid to meet someone where they are. And in doing so, you start to recognize that compassion is not one-sided. It moves both ways. The more you give, the more you feel held, not always by others, but by the path itself. By the knowing that you are not here to perfect anything, you are here to serve with an open heart. In Tibetan teachings, compassion is often visualized as light radiating from the heart center, reaching outward in all directions. This light does not demand recognition. It does not need to be seen. It simply shines. And in that quiet shining, something in the world begins to shift. The weight becomes a little lighter, the distance a little smaller, the pain a little less lonely. You begin to trust this light, not because it eliminates hardship, but because it reminds you that love exists even in the hardest places. You begin to live not to escape the darkness, but to carry light into it. This is not idealism, it is responsibility. The responsibility to use your presence as medicine, your energy as contribution, your actions as prayer. And just as compassion supports others, it supports you. In the moments when you feel small, when the path seems uncertain, when the world feels heavy, returning to compassion grounds you. It reminds you of your place. It returns you to meaning. Not a meaning you invent, but one you remember through giving. This remembrance becomes your foundation. You no longer need constant affirmation. You no longer base your worth on what others offer back. Compassion becomes self-sustaining. It becomes the current you move within. And within that current, trust becomes effortless. Not naive, but steady. Not blind, but wide-eyed and full-hearted. This trust doesn't require guarantees. It requires presence. The willingness to keep showing up, to keep offering care, to keep choosing alignment over convenience, to keep loving in the face of doubt. Compassion is the path, the practice, and the reward. It is what opens the door, what carries you through, and what remains when everything else changes. It is not a step along the way, it is the way. And when you give from that place, you stop asking whether the universe sees you, because you feel, in every moment, that you are part of something greater, and that something is always listening. After everything you've just heard, after every breath, every silence, every truth that unfolded layer by layer, something in you is already different. Not because you learned something new, but because you remembered something ancient, that the universe is not your enemy, that life is not happening to you, but through you. That trust isn't something you earn, it's something you return to. You now know that surrender is not weakness, but wisdom. That karma is not punishment, but a conversation. That emptiness is not void, but space for clarity. You've seen how silence heals, how compassion transforms, how uncertainty teaches, and how even death whispers lessons of presence. You've touched the truth that your consciousness continues, that your mind shapes your world, and that even the chaos holds pattern if you're willing to slow down and look. This journey has not been about believing more, it's been about fearing less. Because when you stop needing to control, you begin to belong, not just to this life, but to the flow of everything. Now, it's your turn. In the comments, share the one lesson that stayed with you, the one that whispered, "This is for you." Write it down. Not just for me, but for you. Words make memories stronger. Your insight might even be the sign someone else was waiting for. And if you felt something shift even a little, subscribe to the channel. New content like this is made to remind you of what's already inside you: trust, presence, and the quiet courage to walk your path awake. Sleep well, breathe deeply, and carry this wisdom with you, because even when you forget, the universe remembers.